So good morning, everybody. Welcome to excuse me? There we go. All right. Thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to, which will be shortly, the formal meeting of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, also known as TriMet. The board meeting, this is for Wednesday, October 25th, 2017. Before we get into the formal agenda, we provide an opportunity for citizens to address the board on issues that may be of concern and to make suggestions, and also to give us any input on anything that's on the agenda here today. We have a sign-up sheet outside, and the sign-up begins 30 minutes prior to this public forum beginning, and we close the sign up at 9 o'clock, and people will be heard based on the order in which they sign up. Today, we'll look. I haven't looked to see how many we have, but I will right at the moment. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 folks who signed up to speak. So I will call you up at 2 at a time. We try to limit this time for this to 45 minutes, and so usually, depending on the number of folks, we try to limit the testimony to 2 or 3 minutes. Why don't we set it at 3 minutes today, and we'll go from there. So what I'm going to do is call up the first 2 people. And the first 2 people are Ken Marks from the Rosewood and Douglas Allen. And I think you provided us something, right?
Yes, I did.
All right, good. Mr. Marks, is that you?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to be reading my testimony, so with my vision, I ask you to bear with me.
Okay.
My name is Ken Marks, and I'm the Director of Transportation Equity at the Rosewood Initiative. I am here today to speak to you about service enhancements for east of I-205. First, let me express my delight that TriMet has come to the realization that it is not serving its core ridership, which has been pushed to East Portland and East Multnomah County. And the TriMet service is not designed to meet the needs of these riders. The testimony at last month's board meeting indicates that TriMet has come to the same conclusion as that expressed by community organizations in this and other settings for a long time. Now the TriMet is on the same page as the community in what the needs of its riders are. It is time to begin to fully fund the East Side Service Enhancement Plan. The ESEP should also be the basis for creating a frequent service network running north and south. TriMet has continually professed that they do not realize or know if there is sufficient demand for north-south service. A survey report that I provided each of you indicates that for 162nd Avenue, there is definitely a demand for north-south service, a demand that is much higher and needs much better service than what is currently being proposed by TriMet. I would note that that service is Monday through Friday only and 45-minute headways. The survey results indicate that higher frequency is necessary for the riders along this alignment, as well as weekend services. Yesterday, I testified before the State Transportation Improvement Fund Rule Advisory Committee, or STIFRAC, and man, that's a mouthful, established by HB 2017, Section 122. I reminded them that the responsibility is to ensure that the new funding is supposed to go to establishing and enhancing bus service in areas with high percentages of low-income families. No large geographical area in the metro region meets that criteria, as well as east of I-205. TriMet has or will be receiving the resources to build out an east side frequent service network. It should bring the lines 20, 73, 77, and 87 to full frequency, and much sooner than it is currently projecting. In addition, you should expand the new line on 162nd to create a loop that includes 148th Avenue and make it frequent service and weekends. TriMet should also reroute the 73 line to Airport Way and then over to the Park Rose Transit Center, giving the east side 3 frequent service lines to the living wage jobs in the Columbia Corridor. These steps will create a network that truly meets the needs of East County. The community is here to work with TriMet on this. We are just waiting on you all to provide the service. Thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate your efforts. Questions? I'd like to know a little bit about the Rosewood Initiative. Can you just give us a real quick explanation of your initiative and who's involved?
The Rosewood Initiative is a 501c3 nonprofit that works to improve living conditions and economic conditions in the area between around 162nd and Stark. And for most of our services or projects, we cover about a mile radius. But with respect to transportation related issues, then we work from essentially I-205 east to 181st Street, given the nature of transportation. And then that also covers essentially from the river down to the Clackamas County or Multnomah County line. And east are, so that's the broad sense. We do, we're starting to advocate in areas around housing, education, as well as our current programming of economic development and transportation issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would it be possible for you to give your written comments to the staff? Would it be possible for you to give your written comments or what you said to the staff? Because as I look in the document you gave us, it doesn't give that kind of level of detail of what you're really seeking.
That's correct, because the original report or survey was specifically in response to the proposed service on 162nd.
Okay.
But
your comments went further than that.
Correct. I understand that. And so I would be happy to provide that. I do need to amend them to add some further comments that I added to the written testimony. So I
Okay.
can email that to you all.
That would be perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Allen.
President Warner and members of the board, my name is Doug Allen, and for full disclosure, I retired 4.5 years ago from TriMet Service Planning and Scheduling Department. I also want to talk about crosstown service, which from TriMet's beginning, people have had high aspirations for crosstown service. TriMet's been slow to provide it, but there have been some real successes over the years, like the service on Chavez and the service on 82nd Avenue. And so now we come to 162nd Avenue and 148th Avenue. Before I started working for TriMet, I had the pleasure of being a member of the Citizen Advisory Committee for the Banfield Transitway project, which morphed into the first light rail line.
You're dating yourself now, yes you are.
And the concept then was that this line would be fed by multiple north-south routes intersecting at the station locations. And unfortunately, following the 1980s recession, TriMet didn't have the resources to provide that promised service, and now it's been multiple decades since then, and finally TriMet's talking about it, but I think you're doing a big mistake by putting in inadequate service. When you wonder about the demand, there's an old cliche that says, you don't judge the need for a bridge by how many people swim across the river. And you don't judge the need for this crosstown service on 162nd Avenue by putting in totally inadequate service, service at 45-minute intervals, weekdays only. I think you're probably using just a single bus out there. There's time between now and when you implement that service next spring to improve that service, provide a much more frequent service. Put out 3 buses probably would do it. You have the running times. There's time, if you make a decision now, direct your staff to provide better service, there's time between now and then to write the better schedules, have the operators sign up, get all the material out in the normal schedule that TriMet has for implementing new service. But I think it would be a real mistake to provide inadequate service and then have it fail because not enough people find that kind of frequency useful when a large part of the use of such a line is connecting service. You'll be riding the MAX line to the station and catching it to your home or up to Airport Way to jobs up there, or taking the 4 line, soon to be the Division Rapid Transit line. So I think it's incumbent upon you to make that initial service a success. And I hope you can do something about that.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Doug. Question, what's adequate service to you to start out with?
I really think any new service that TriMet puts in should be 15-minute service or better. I just don't think that your recent experience with, for example, the Tualatin and Sherwood service, the rush hour only, the half-hour service. I mean, West is another example of service that's, you could have much higher ridership if you had better frequency.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, thank you both. The next 2 we have are Bill Owen and Terry Parker. Parker. I can't read, thank you. It is an R.
Sorry about my scribbling.
That's all right. Sorry about my eyesight.
How are you guys doing today?
Doing fine, thank you.
Good. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I think my appearance today here is a bit of a celebratory appearance. I'm so happy with what's going on the website and the direction that I see TriMet taking that I'm just pleased as punch. And as a frequent writer, I get real happy when I see that. The last couple of years, I lost a little bit of interest maybe in TriMet. I'm not sure. And then I got a card from Neil or somebody said I was getting increased service on the 52 line, and that made me happy. And so that's why I'm here today. But there's many other things that are good. The increased service on the 20 line is absolutely imperative. I don't know if you walk from Beaverton Transit Center over to Cedar Hills Crossing, but that's a really long walk, and the 20 doesn't run very often. So for those of us who have a disability, it's hard to get to that shopping mall, and I think a lot of people want to get to that shopping mall. The 62 runs behind there too, but it's pretty infrequent service, although the 62 is a nice line. If we saw more frequency on the 62, we'd be real happy. We had these nice folks talking about service on the east side. What I liked about the postcard from Neil was that you guys are also paying attention to the west side, and we're very, very grateful for that. We know that the metropolitan area is growing. You guys are responsive to those needs. The interconnection of bus lines on the west side is fantastic. I've gotten to know it. It's very intelligently set up. More frequent service on the 62 and the 20 as maybe in the works is great. I also want to say the income-based fare is great. I love that. The citation, I took that survey and I've recommended a lower citation. I think community service is a great idea to be able to pay that off. What else? I think that when you guys are bold and you lead like you're doing now, the community responds. The last time we were bold was in 1996 when we built the transit mall, and that put it in people's mind that transit can work. And when you guys are continually out there pushing transit, it keeps it in people's mind, and they believe that transit can work, and it revitalizes Portland, and it revitalizes our spirits to some extent. I really like talking to the folks that I meet on the MAX and the buses. So I really like what you guys are doing. You know, two things. I have a disability, so sometimes I want to see more benches at Beaverton Transit Center and Beaverton Central, and maybe at all the stops. Sometimes I have a difficult time finding a place to sit down. If maybe there was a placard up said these seats must be vacated for people with physical challenges, maybe that would be good. I would like a few more benches, and always I could use a little more power washing at some of the stops. I know that's a continual task for you guys, and I think you do a good job, but I just wanted to mention those two things and say thank you. I think you're doing a very good job.
Thank you very much for coming in and giving us that report and also giving us constructive criticism. I
Yes.
appreciate that, yes. All right.
You're very
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name's Terry Parker. I live in the Rose City Park neighborhood, and I also served on the Banfield Transit project in the 70s, the Citizens Advisory Committee. The fact is I chaired it. I want to discuss a little bit about the bond issue and things that I think need to be brought to your attention when you're deliberating a bond issue. I'm a homeowner, and like most homeowners and property owners in the city, I think we just got our tax bill. And the property taxes from the people that I've talked to, it went anywhere from 6 to 12%. Yeah, somebody has told me that theirs is 12%. I'm concerned that the bond issue is going to raise the cost of housing, because if I was a landlord, I'd want to pass that on to my tenants, and tenants are complaining about 10% raises a year. So it's something to think about. Also, I think we need to think a little bit about equity. You're asking the property owners to pay for a line that, in my circumstance, it's not going to affect me at all, because I rarely go to that quadrant in the city of Portland, and if I do, I usually am carrying something that I can't carry on transit in the back of my truck. So I'm questioning that. And then you want to put a tax on the automobile, and I certainly understand that because we're looking at some freeway improvements along with that. But you also want to do some bicycle improvements. Bicycles freeload. They don't pay any user fees. Maybe that should be included into into your thing too, some sort of a user fee. Maybe just a user fee for carrying a bicycle on transit. That's freight. And then the riders themselves, they're going to be the primary beneficiaries of a new line, new Southwest line. And it seems like the fare structure should reflect that, and something in, maybe a little bit of a bump in fares to help pay for it, so that it's a more equitable, so that we don't have just the same people that are always paying taxes and the same people that always aren't. And I think that's real important. I think equity is real important if you're looking at a bond issue, and then let the voters decide, because I don't consider it, what I've read about it at this point, I don't consider it too equitable. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Maybe you can comment on that later afterwards if you want to hang around.
Yeah, well,
because-
I'm going over to the city council meeting. I'm
Oh,
at
okay, all right.
9:45, time certain over there, so.
Okay. Well,
two places in one trip.
So I want you to know, first off, no decisions have been made.
I understand
on the
that.
bond issue, and your comments are good.
But I wanted to get down here early
That's
in the
fair.
process to
That's
make
fair.
those comments.
And I will point out, bikes are now, after January of next year, going to start paying a tax on the sale of the bicycles. So
And that's only going to multi-use pass. It's the only way it can be used.
that is, it actually could be used on others, but that's the way the legislation was set up. That's correct. That's right. All right.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, the next two I have are Justin Tyler Norton, did I get that right? And Chris Walker. Is it Justin? Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Yeah.
Again, yeah. Go ahead and begin.
Yep, please proceed.
So I'm here again today to talk about TriMet Fair Inspection. I was here last month.
Yes.
Kind of gave a brief account. Here to provide a little more detail. Someone approached me afterwards, asked for my email address, said that they would get in contact with me. My assumption was that they were with TriMet staff. So I haven't heard back from anyone, and I haven't really received a response or answer to my questions related to this matter in, like I said, 3 years. So just to kind of quickly summarize for anyone who hasn't or is not familiar with the testimony I provided last month. So I exited train with one other individual at the Yamhill platform in 2014. 2 fare inspectors, James Takey and John Coriel, approached us at the platform to inspect fare. So the outcome of this situation is the reason that I'm here, and the outcome of this situation is the reason that I've tried to send emails to Joe Esmonde, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Close enough. Okay.
Fair enough. As well as Mr. Warner. When I actually look at my email correspondence going back to 2014, you actually responded at one point, but didn't really answer the questions that I'm asking.
Probably because I
again,
didn't
that's
know the facts. That's
The reason
correct.
I'm here. So, to provide a little more detail, the individual next to me, so myself, this other individual, interacting with 2 separate fare inspectors. The individual next to me, he interacted with John Coriel. And what I observed is what you actually sent me by email, which I believe is what's referred to as standard operating procedure of 313. Okay, and as I read it on TriMet's website, he followed that, step by step. Okay, so he asked a series of questions about the situation, wanted to know why. He was pretty engaging. I think, generally speaking, had a really good demeanor overall interaction with this individual. He contacted dispatch to check and see if this individual had any prior warnings or citations issued. And ultimately, he just, once he confirmed that, he issued a warning to Mr. Hunter, which is the individual standing next to me. And again, he followed that procedure as it's written. The individual that I interacted with is James Takey. He asked me one question, which is the same question that John Coriel began with the other individual. Do you have fare? My response was no, as was the other individual. He didn't do any of those steps that John Coriel did in that process, none whatsoever. Okay. I tried to explain the situation at first, and when he didn't respond, I just stopped. Right. He didn't ask any questions. He did not contact dispatch, and to my recollection, he didn't even make eye contact. I mean, it was just like, it was very mechanical in that sense. And he immediately issued a citation. Like I said, there was no question whatsoever. So my question is, who here, members of the board, can tell me why I was treated so differently in this situation? There are a couple of things that I'd like to go through on here as well, including a comment that you made towards the end of my testimony last month, which was, I felt like you may have interpreted my concern as being about a criminal record. As I'm sure most of you know, TriMet fare violation is not criminal, and it's not a misdemeanor either, which I'm still unclear as to what it is or what it looks like or how that works when it goes to Multnomah Circuit Court, but it's this kind of very gray area. So that's not my concern.
I understand.
Yeah, my concern is that there at least is this individual and maybe other individuals who are practicing a very different decision-making process that deviates from this standard operating procedure a lot. It's very, very different. And why other individuals seem to be following it. And there doesn't seem to be any recourse, communication, or way to address it in Multnomah Circuit Court. And I think that's a problem. It's a serious problem when it involves individuals paying $175 or more for a fare violation, even if they haven't had any warnings or citations issued. And again, I know this may be redundant if you recall my testimony from last month, but I brought a document from the legal department at TriMet. Kimberly Akimoto provided that I have no warnings or citations whatsoever, none. And despite that, as well as, and I brought some of these if you guys would like to look at them, this is just a portion of day, week, and month-long passes that I have purchased since 2012, actually. This is just a portion. I mean, I can show you my Metro card that I use when I go to New York. I use public transit, and I like it. I think it works. And it works well here. But this and what occurred is not working, and it's an unfair practice in my opinion. And no one yet has answered that question as to why I was treated differently, or maybe other individuals are treated differently, and what that decision-making process looks like if it's not that standard operating procedure.
Mr. Norton, I appreciate your tenacity and patience, frankly, so,
Okay.
so thank you for coming. I guess it's my expectation that staff will get back with him and actually engage in this issue so we can actually have some resolution. It may not be agreement when we get done, but I want to get as much understanding and about the issues as we can and try to answer his questions. Is that something we can do, Mr. General Manager?
We can, but I would also just note that there has been communications, I think, in the past with Mr. Norton. And I'd also just note that this is the 2014 event. And I would also note that we are changing all of those
Exactly.
Procedures, and in order to make sure that we do, and we will accordingly enter into a training program with those who do fair inspection to make sure that there's an understanding of the role and
Perfect.
the SOP associated with it. So my view is that what we can do is look forward and be better, but I can't adjudicate an event of 2014 when past reviews have not validated one point of view related to this event. So
I'm looking for any point of view. I haven't received a response whatsoever, and
So
I
let's-
appreciate the idea of looking forward, but accountability
you want to
is
say
really what I'm interested in.
Director Stovall, do you have a comment?
Well, Mr. Norton, I think you're asking a question that probably doesn't have a sufficient answer.
Why?
Because ultimately we failed from your perspective. I can't speak to the situation. I wasn't there. I don't think any of us were. As a board member, though, your description of what occurred is not the ideal situation for two people
Okay.
to interact with two different individuals and have two different experiences is
Right.
not the outcome that we desire at all.
Okay.
So as a board member,
Sure.
Mr. Norton, I apologize because that's not the experience as a stakeholder, as a rider, as someone who interacts with our system should receive.
Yeah, these are copies, just screenshots. I don't know why the formatting's different, but
Mm-hmm.
have you? And it shows each fair inspector's name, my name, the other individual's name, time. The platform is different for some reason. I don't know why. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe it's just another warning that was issued by John Coriel. I appreciate hearing that, but it still doesn't speak to, again, this particular instance. And just because I'm speaking and I'm able to come here and speak to my concern does not mean that there are not many other individuals who've experienced the same situation. And so accountability, again, in that sense, is my...
So what I can't do is I can't take a single situation
Sure.
and then expand it out to every single situation that occurs. I mean, what we're doing there is we're saying, I had an experience, and everybody else is probably going to have the same experience. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can validate for you what your perceived experience was, and apologize. I mean, frankly, we have 300,000 interactions every single day,
Yeah.
and
How
you
many
know
of those
we
are
would
like this?
love to actually have every single one of those interactions be one that you walk away from, and it's something that you have that great feeling. And every now and then, we're not going to live up to your expectation. And again, I apologize for that. What we can do, and what we can commit to you, is that we can certainly commit that we, and as General Manager McFarland has already referenced, as we go forward, it's folks like you who come forward, and all of us have different experiences in every aspect of what we do, is to take this experience and say, we need to make sure that this doesn't have the opportunity of happening, following standard operating procedure, similar to the next individual that was with you, that type of thing, and holding our folks accountable to those outcomes that you've referenced should be the experience that you're talking about. We can't go back to 2014. We can't do that. We can't go back and fix that situation, that interaction. But what we can do is we can take your testimony and say, Mr. Norton, we're taking your information, we're taking what you've brought to us, and we're going to go out there and we're going to work much, much harder to ensure that standard operating procedures are followed. Now, my question to you though is,
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. You know, I'm apologizing as a board member. I'm not speaking for the organization in the sense that, you know, from a legal perspective, I'm saying all this stuff. I'm talking from a board member and saying,
Sure.
I apologize. at that point, I commit as an individual, as a board member, to move forward and also to follow up on things like this that you're referencing, and to say we can do a better job. And so with that, I'm looking to you to say, what is it going to take to ensure that you get a response that's going to make sure that you feel like we as an organization is listening?
So also just to be clear, and to answer your question, it's not my individual expectation. It's policy as written as you wrote it.
So I'm going to I think we need to cut this off here. I think what I want is from the staff is, my expectation is that you actually tell us what actually happened as much as can. And if standard operating procedures weren't followed, we should admit to that. And yeah, and that's so. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Up here because I heard that the TriMet Lift Pass that all Lyft customers get will not be covered on the as part of the low income fare. And for me, I don't. This is just a rumor, and for me, it's something very important because if you look at the average Lyft passenger, they are SSI government checks, and they don't really have a lot of money as it is, and then to pay whatever the pass price is. I know we're very blessed to have a Lyft, but I'm just concerned that people with disabilities and and seniors would be really put out to pay for whatever, as times go on and we consider fare raises and decreases. It's something that we need to think about. And also, thinking that with last year's winter snow and storms and stuff, it might be time to be working with ODOT in the city and figure out where to put snow and stuff when we have if we have the huge snowstorm. We all hope not, but like last year, because it was very hard we've heard of a lot of people who had a hard time when the snowbanks are right up next to the bus stops. It's really hard, so.
Good
Those are my
comments.
two.
Maybe the staff can get with you and talk to you about how we envision the low-income fare program being implemented with the accessible transportation programs. So thank you, and your other one's always good. I think we're trying to improve all we can. So good comments. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you. All right, the last two I have is Orlando Lopez and Jim Howell. I was reminding, if the board wants to talk, make sure you push your button on your speaker. Good morning.
Good morning. As you all know, my name is Orlando Lopez, and I'm the community organizer for Opal Environmental Justice. The lack of e-service improvements over the years is something that our members in our community has been advocating, and this has been confirmed at the last presentation last month. We need better service in East Portland, better than what's being proposed, especially on 162nd. And a loop going from 162nd to 148th would greatly improve that service in East Portland, in addition to improving frequency and reliability. TriMet also needs to stop comparing itself to the national trend in terms of ridership. It's a really low bar because, as you all know, the national trend is that ridership is declining. And I'm glad at the last presentation that we put to rest that low gas prices have an impact on ridership. But back to this benchmark or what TriMet has been using as a benchmark of the national ridership, we should just kick that can and actually just compare ourselves to Seattle and Houston, before the hurricanes, and how they've been bucking the trend on ridership and what they're doing correctly. They've actually been investing a lot more in buses, Seattle has also been investing more in light rail, but buses was predominantly what they've been investing in. And also going towards more of a grid system. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the last TriMet board meeting. There was a presentation about the budgeting process, and I heard this term, participatory budgeting, and I got my hopes up, thinking, wow, like this is something that you're all going to go forward with. But as the presentation went on, what was described was anything but participatory budgeting. In fact, all you were really talking about was trying to get more feedback from community members without actually saying, like, well, this is how our community is actually going to get to decide what to do with that money. A great example of participatory budgeting can be seen and found in New York, which has been actually pioneering this system here in this country. Participatory budgeting has its roots in Brazil and most of Latin America before it made its way here to the U.S. So in the past, this board has talked about the importance of wording, and what we're seeing is this co-opting of participatory budgeting. Let's call it what it is. It's nothing but, it's far from participatory budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Mr. Warner, members of the board. My name is Jim Howell. I'm the Strategic Planning Director for AORTA, Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates. I also used to work at TriMet back in the late 40s and 70s and early 80s. And about 5 months ago, last time I testified in front of you, I asked you about what your long-range ridership goals are going to be. Haven't heard anything about that lately. If you haven't, I'll have a suggestion. For a 20-year goal, that you double your ridership, both on MAX and buses. Now, if you would do that, we wouldn't be talking about widening freeways around Portland, because TriMet would be doing its job. Now, I appreciate the fact that you're beginning to reinvest in the bus system, and you heard some good suggestions already this morning on how to do that. But I want to focus on your rapid transit system, which is called MAX. And it has, at this point, about maxed out. It no longer can add any more service because of the bottleneck downtown. And in fact, today, coming here, I waited at the Rose Quarter for about 3 or 4 minutes until the switches cleared, because there were trains crossing. Every train in the TriMet system on every trip has to cross an ancient lift span bridge. And at each end of that bridge, there's interlockings, which basically prevent trains from running into each other when they're either passing or at those locations. And there's a limited number of trains that can pass those interlockings, and during your peak hour, you've reached that limit. And so the system cannot grow, and it has to grow over the next 20 years. And there's only one way to do it, and that is you have to have a new river crossing, and you have to have a much faster way to get through downtown and past downtown, because you're not getting the regional trips on that light rail system today because of the long trek through downtown, over 20 minutes in each direction, both north and south and east and west, just to get through downtown. So you're going to have to start seriously looking at a subway. And I know every time it's mentioned, we go, oh, we can't do that. That's too expensive. Well, is it? The simple fact is you never ever looked at it seriously enough to know if it is. I propose that a subway from the Rose Quarter to Goose Hollow, with a station downtown and 2 on the east side, plus an east side connection, you would spend less money than you will on the Southwest Corridor project. And it certainly would have a far greater effect on ridership. I don't think you should be adding more lines to a system that cannot function at its center. And there is no planning, absolutely no planning by Metro or TriMet for subway, and I think you ought to probably get on the stick and start looking at that. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to reach any kind of ridership goals that you really should be looking at. So
Thank you.
get busy on a subway.
Okay. And I'd point out, there's a lot of people talking about a subway at this time. I haven't heard people speak of for a long time, so thanks for bringing that forward again, Jim.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. So that concludes those who signed up for the public forum. So I'm going to close the public forum and then move on to our normal business meeting. So I'm going to call to order the regular business meeting of the TriMet Board of Directors for October 25th, 2017. And the first items on the agenda are the board reports. The first one is on the Transit Equity Advisory Committee we call TEAC. Dr. Bethel, are you ready to provide a report this morning?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good
Yes,
morning
ma'am.
to everyone. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
There was a discussion at most previous TEAC meeting on the development of the equity lens to help inform TriMet's internal and external equity efforts. Staff also provided an update on the 3 upcoming community partner transportation forums meant to update and gather feedback from community agencies around the administrative hearing process, the launch of the new low-income fare program, and the HOP Fast Pass electronic fare system. I'd just like to add into this report that while I was at the APTA Expo, it was good to go by the HOP Fast stand and just stand there and look and talk to Enid, because they were really pushing how great the HOP Pass program is here at TriMet, and using it as a model for that national expo, which I know was a great thing, and very proud to have stood there and been a part of TriMet and talked to the general manager of Enid himself. Also, let me continue now back into that. Also, staff also shared the new draft fare enforcement training plan, gathered some feedback on additional areas of training, and TEAC members would like added to and emphasized. TEAC members also received an update on the advisory work group of HB 2777. That work group is made up of community representatives identified in the legislation and will work with TriMet staff to build out recommendations for implementing the administrative hearing process. Finally, the group viewed the newly launched low-income fare webpage meant to help gather feedback on the program design. Always, it's good conversation. Agenda is normally always a packed agenda. We get good participation of those who are a part of TEAC. If there's any questions anyone have, I will be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Bethel. Any questions from the board? I don't see any, Dr. Bethel. Thank you very much. Moving on then to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, which we call MPAC. Director Prosser.
Impact last met on October 11th. 2 items on the agenda that got the most discussion. One was some tweaks that Metro is looking at to the urban growth boundary expansion process to address some of the concerns by local governments. So that's moving forward. And the second item of interest was there was a presentation by the city of Milwaukee in a part of a series where MPAC is looking at housing trends and policies around the region. So we heard what was going on in Milwaukee, and as you know, with the advent of the Orange Line, there has been quite a bit of activity in their downtown, but they've discovered that they're developing an imbalance between housing and jobs, and so they shared some of the efforts they're making to correct that imbalance. So, and that was it.
Any questions for Director Prosser? Thank you again for serving on that committee. We really appreciate it. Well, that can conclude the board reports for this morning. The next report that we have is from the general manager. Are you prepared, Mr. General Manager?
Board President, I am. Thank you for the opportunity. So let me just respond ever so briefly to some of the comments in the public forum. And again, I think I appreciate all those comments, and particularly related, Mr. Mark's comments and others are related to service in East Portland. And indeed, it is a focus. We will be reviewing all of our service recommendations in the context of HB 2017 revenue, and actually have on your agenda the appointment of an advisory committee to help us review all of that. Just to note that the first resources we'll actually see associated with that will be in hopefully early calendar 2019. So we'll have to sort of phase our way through that. I'd also just note that, and we'll certainly make all of this quite transparent to everybody in the community who's interested in new and expanded bus service, but there will be some need to phase in new service. We cannot, do a dramatic increase in service all in 1 year without having the buses and the bus facilities and the place to park them and service them and the mechanics and all the other elements of a service plan in place. So that's what we'll be walking through a process for. The public meetings that were referenced this month and into next are really focused on all of those issues, so we're looking forward to hearing from our community. I'd also note that as part of the Division Transit Plan's adoption, we committed to reinvest all the service hours of the number 4 on the east side from Gresham into downtown Portland into local north-south service. So whether or not we can advance that ahead of the project with additional resources will be one of the topics for conversation as we get into both next budget year, but also more importantly, I think the plan for the allocation of HB 2017 resources. And again, just generally, we've identified 3 general areas of investment. One is, of course, the low-income fare program, which we've committed to. The second would be the kinds of service, the community level services that are really important that have been mentioned here. But then we also have the need to deal with some of the really congested corridors in the region and begin to offer really stronger service in some of those areas. So I think across the board, we'll see some really dramatic and really positive increases in bus service. But I would also just note there's going to need to be a little patience as we grow the system, because what we're talking about over the next 7 to 8 years is probably increase of service by about 1/3 overall. That's probably a little bit of a conservative number, but we'll be working through all of those allocations and shared and logistics with our advisory committees and of course with you. And we'll be sharing some of that at various rounds of public meetings that will be coming up. So lots of opportunity, again, I think it's a really exciting time. I did want to just mention the topic of the bond measure that did come up, and I would continue to note that we're working with our partners and each of the county coordinating committees as well as the City of Portland. So 4 different entities to see if there are a series of projects that make sense to bring together to the voters. But I would just continue to reiterate what Mr. President, your comments were, which is that it's not only what it would be, but if, because there's also a very strategic decision about whether 2018 is the right time or whether it should be part of a broader regional endeavor that would be time more aimed at right now for 2020. So I think both those considerations are really important for us in the relatively short term to come to some closure on. So again, if we're aiming at 2020, we need to know that and really begin to adjust our expectations accordingly. I would just note, related to Mr. Walker's comments, particularly on snow and ice, that was actually a comment that I wanted to make in my report. We have been updating our snow and ice plan. Patrick Pricer from our Transportation Department has been leading that effort. Unfortunately, last year was a year that we had a lot to learn from in terms of snow and ice. And it seems like every time we have another event, there's something more to add that we need to add to our tool chest related to responding to those situations. Very difficult for us, of course, but I would just note that we have taken an effort to take all the lessons learned and coordinate those, frankly, with our jurisdictional partners, including the City of Portland and ODOT and others related to snow plowing and all of that. I do know that those are circumstances where everybody is trying very hard to do their best, and that they're very trying circumstances in this region that is probably has a dearth of snow plows compared to what the needs were, particularly last year. And I say that with one of the nicest days you could imagine this morning anyway. It feels like we're being lulled into the storm here. I would also just note related to the system capacity issues that Mr. Howell raised, and I think, as you know, we are doing some studies around the steel bridge that also include the potential of a subway, if you will, or an under-river crossing. There's also talk of a subway as an alternative in the city's transportation system plan. So those conversations will continue, but we'll learn a lot over the next few months related to the steel bridge capacity issues. But I think even more importantly, the message I wanted to send is that it's not just downtown. Actually, if you look at the most constrained part of our system capacity right now is perhaps Gateway, where we have the red line, the green line, and the blue line all coming together in all directions. And so I would just note to Jim and others who are interested in this, we have a presentation during the briefing on the Red Line project, as we call it, which partially is intended to open up the additional capacity through that really important juncture and that really important site, amongst other outcomes that we would like to see for that project. So just would note that that's on the agenda. Any questions at this point? Yeah.
How much did the city of Seattle pass for their bond for transportation? I know off the top of your...
So the program moving forward is about $50 billion.
$50 billion.
But that incorporated some previous approvals. So the initial, I'm looking at Bernie,
The tax increase itself was about $25 billion. The overall package, including federal matching funds and future revenue from passenger fares and so forth, was estimated to be about $50 billion over the next 40 years.
right, so it was about
4
20
years, Bernie?
Over 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah.
And that's about 2 times the size of Portland?
Well, one
Seattle?
thing to be careful about is the regional economy there is more than 2 times Portland, so maybe 3 times.
More like 7 times.
Okay, thank you. But yes, so that's an important, I think, distinction.
So they're going to have a lot more money to do what Mr. Howell has advocated, and I know I've advocated along with Els, but to fix the bottlenecks.
Yes, it's sort of, I've had the reason to walk down memory lane perhaps a bit over the last week or so, and recall that I was, I came to TriMet for the West Side Light Rail project, almost, 27 years ago this month. And the first project was the tunnel through the West Hills. We have difficult geology in Portland related to tunneling. So I always caution people, it may be a very important thing to think about for a future, but it will be a very costly endeavor. There's just simply no if, ands, or buts about that.
Well, I don't debate it's not going to be costly, but then you put in other factors. I think we'd be ahead, or this agency would be ahead. If you had lots of money.
No question.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Neil.
So let me just note, again, looking at ridership, you've seen over this year our ridership somewhere between 2.5% and 3% down from the year before. That continues to be the trend in September. I would say that there are some bright spots in that horizon. One is max ridership was actually up about 0.8%. So the decline was really in the bus system and primarily midday and weekend. I'd also note that we saw a healthy increase in Orange Line ridership. If our number was about 5.6% compared to last year. So that's a healthy growth number that we'd like to see, and like to see that continue for a number of years. So just to note that, and I wanted to also just note again and aim everyone at the public outreach efforts that we have underway, including our advisory committees and the public meetings and open houses that we'll be having over the next month. I think are really important. We've included some online surveys and ways for people, as Mr. Owens noted in his testimony, to offer us suggestions, even if they're not able to come to the actual open houses. I did want to bring up Kara Fitzpatrick, if I could, to do our quarterly financial report. Just to note that our CFO, Dee, is not able to be with us today, but we have the first string, as you know, in terms of somebody who really knows our finances in Kara, so we're pleased to have her here today.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kara Fitzpatrick. I'm the Director of Financial Services at TriMet, and I'm going to give an update on our first quarter of FY18. Our total revenue for the period ended 9/30/17 is under budget by 1.8 million, or 1.5%. Our total operating expenses are under budget by 7.8 million, or 6.3%. So I apologize. There we go. And this next point on the net results from operations are actually 3.3 million for the quarter, and they are better than budget by 6.0 million. There's a edit to that, to the slide. Our payroll tax revenues grew by 8.4% compared to the last quarter at this time last year. And passenger revenue is 2.3 million less than budget, or 7.7%. And noted as ticket revenue was down. There were 2 days of free fares in August due to a technology hiccup. And passenger revenue decreased 3.9% compared to the same period last year. Onto our total expenses. System operating expenses are 4.6% under budget, or 5.6 million. And noteworthy in that is 1.1 million in operations, with 0.3 million in transportation related to our workers' compensation. And a couple notes on that is we've been more judicious in litigation decisions and stronger claims management. And in addition, the district has created a new position for a deputy general counsel dedicated to addressing claims related to workers' compensation, with ultimately helping the agency address workers' compensation litigation more efficiently and less expensively. And in the maintenance division, diesel fuel is down 0.2 million, primarily due to gas prices lower than budget. Onto our operating project expenses. Overall, repairs and maintenance to existing infrastructure is our operating project expenses. And this area is 2.3 million, or 62% under budget, and that is primarily due to the timing of operating expenses, as we're only in the first quarter of fiscal year 18. Oh, that is it. Short and sweet. And are there any questions?
Questions by the board? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kara. If I might just continue with the report, I did just want to acknowledge that I did make my announcement of retirement upcoming to our agency staff at a town hall meeting last Wednesday. Very well received by me, but it was very touching in terms of the response from the staff and people that I've certainly worked with all these years. But I wanted the message that I left them with was that the agency will be in good hands, theirs. We have an excellent staff who really do know their jobs and do a great job every day, and it's been my honor to really work with them over these last 27 years. But I'd also note that it has been my honor to work with this board of directors and past board of directors. This, I sometimes consider myself amongst the luckiest GMs in the industry because of the governance structure of TriMet, where we have such dedicated, good citizens coming together on a board of directors to help guide us as we move forward. So I really do want to thank you for your service and the opportunity I've worked for you for all these years. As you know, I will be kicking around for the next 5 months, and my guarantee to you is I will continue to put the pedal to the metal because we have a lot to do. All these issues that have come up, HB 2017, some of the fleet issues, maintenance issues, lots of other pressing issues that we really do need to address as an agency. And again, we'll continue to work diligently toward all of those. I would sometimes just, if I might, take the least to share some comparisons, because sometimes we get into the day-to-day grind of our work and the challenges and the problems that we undertake, but when you add up over a long period of time where TriMet has been and where it is, I think it's an impressive picture. When I started, this agency was somewhere in the realm of 55 million annual rides a year. It's now 25 or so years later at 100 million rides a year, or very, very near that. So we've gone from 1 light rail line to 5, with 60 miles of track, and we've added west of the family. We've got a model DBE program. We've got to focus on equity and inclusion. We have budding fare, low-income fare program. In other words, we've made some tremendous progress, I think, over the years in all of these regards. So again, I think the ability to work closely with board of directors has been really important and absolutely key to making that progress over the past. And so again, it's been my pleasure to work with you. I'll look forward to working with you between now and February. And then I'll be out in the audience offering my comments with everybody else. So with that, Mr. Board President, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments for the general manager?
There's other places to be during your retirement than sitting out here,
I hope to find them, actually.
which I haven't learned, but yeah, so. Thank you for all your work, Neil.
Yes.
Especially, again, on the DBE and the contracting language. For my world, it's been very, very big. So, set the national model. So, thank you.
I'd just like to say we're very happy for you in your decision, and I know your wife and kids and grandchildren will be much more happy that you're around. So we'll look forward over the next few months to recognize you more formally and probably roast you a bit too at the same time. So
All deserved.
So again, it's been our pleasure to work with you too, and we wish you well in your retirement. And we'll be talking about how to move forward in our quest to replace you a little later in the agenda. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. With that, then, I'm going to move on to the consent agenda. And for anybody in the audience or watching at home, the items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and may be approved by the board in one blanket motion. However, any board member may remove an item from the consent portion of the agenda for discussion or questions by requesting such action prior to consideration of this portion of the agenda. I would point out we actually have 5 items on the agenda, if my math is correct, adding them up. The first is approval of the board meeting minutes from September 27, 2017, and I think you folks, I saw a note from Kelly that they were inadvertently left out of the packet, but they were sent to you electronically, and you have a copy of those in front of you now, a hard copy of those in front of you. There's a resolution to approve submission of 10 grant applications for federal resources, great one. And the third is a resolution authorizing a contract with Medical Transportation Management, Inc. for paratransit functional abilities assessment services. There's a resolution authorizing a modification of a contract with Convergent Pacific LLC for building and industrial equipment design services for the Ruby Junction Shop Modifications Project. And then finally, there's a resolution for the Board of Directors acting in its capacity as the TriMet Contract Review Board, exempting from competitive bidding requirement a series of contracts for on-call construction manager, general contractor services for building projects and guideway projects. So with that, is there any item on the consent agenda as presented that any member of the board would like to have removed for separate consideration, or any questions?
I've just got a quick question on resolutions 171072 and 73. Just a point of clarification, make sure I fully understand. This is just our standard practice to approve this exempting from competitive bidding. It's a fairly large number, 75 million, but frankly, this is just our normal process of approving the exempting of this competitive bid process so that we can actually use the CMGC process.
Right, and a competitive process will follow to actually select the contractors associated with the project.
Excellent. That was the only question.
All right, thank you. Any others? Okay, then there's a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So move. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. With that, we'll move on to the resolutions. And the first resolution is Resolution 17-10-74, which is electing TriMet board officers and confirming committee appointments. I won't ask the staff to do this one. I will actually take this for them. For those of you who are interested in this item, the purpose of this agenda item is to elect TriMet Board of Directors officers and to confirm appointments to board committees as well as other committees. State law requires that this board elect officers to serve for a term of 2 years, and the last slate of officers was approved in October 28th of 2015. There's an attached resolution which would elect new slate of officers, including Bruce Warner as the president, Travis Stovall as vice president, and Dr. Linda Simmons as the secretary treasurer. I would also point out that if approved by the board, this would also confirm that Director Bauman is going to be responsible for the Committee on Accessible Transportation, that Director Prosser, Warner, and Stovall would be the members that make up the Finance and Audit Committee. The accountability would continue with Dr. T. Allen Bethel. And then the Amalgamated Transit Union ATU/TriMet Pension Fund Trust, Director Esmond has agreed that he would continue that there. The Metropolitan Advisory Committee, MPAC, which we just had a report on earlier, Director Prosser is the primary representative with Director Simmons as the alternative. And then finally, on the Transit Equity Advisory Committee, TIAC, Director Bethel is also will be the liaison with that committee. So with that, is there questions from the board on this agenda item? Seeing none, is there a motion then to approve Resolution 17-10-74?
So moved, Mr. President.
Have a motion? Second. Have a second? Any further discussion? Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 17-10-74, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. All right, the next item also, I think maybe I will take, if that's all right with you, Mr. General Manager, which is Resolution 17-10-81 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transport District of Oregon, which is approving a general manager job description. So I point out that included in our packets, anybody who wants to see this, they can online. The first step to starting the process for securing a new general manager for TriMet is by law we need to develop a position description that adequately describes what we expect this position to do. And again, this is what was done was the existing position description was looked at, modified by staff to reflect some of the new changes. Then there was a group of 3 board of directors, I think Director Prosser, Director Esmond, and Director Simmons, if I'm correct, took some time to go through this in some detail and amended this. I would point out it's a very thorough, I think, description of the position description. I think anybody who picks this up will have a real flavor of what this agency does and some of the priority issues that this board feels are important, many of which we've discussed already this morning. So what I'd like to do is, unless there's questions by the board, is have a motion to approve Resolutions 17-10-81, which would approve this position description and allow us to actually begin the formal recruitment process.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, then, is there a motion to approve Resolution 17-10-81? Did we do that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You made, okay.
Director Esmond just seconded.
I'm with it today, I really am. Okay, with that, is there any other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Who's on first?
It's not me, obviously. Thank you. Well, with that, then I'm going
No.
to call for the vote on the motion to approve Resolution 17-10-81. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Any more laughter? Oh, God. All right.
Sure.
Thank you, yeah. All right, well, let's move on to the next, which is Resolution 17.
Mr. President,
Yes.
may I interject?
Oh, please do,
something
yes.
here? I was on the committee that looked at the position descriptions, and we found an interesting one for, it's from the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. What was interesting about this one, I'm passing a copy of this down, is that it contained a section which they labeled work environment, but when you read those, which is on the bottom of that first page and the top of the second page that I just gave you, we felt that this really identified values of the agency. They put it in the position description for their chief executive officer. We decided not to do that, but we thought that this would be a good discussion to have at our retreat on November 8th, is to talk about what our values are, and with the idea of getting those approved, if possible, in time to be included in the recruitment materials for the general manager. So I'm sending those along for you to look at. Hopefully they will spark some ideas. And I'm also passing along a copy of our budget themes for this current fiscal year. Again, to get some ideas generated, so when we have a discussion on the 8th, if the board is amenable to that, that we've had some time to think about this and consider it and come prepared, ready to offer our suggestions.
Good comments and good suggestions.
And for the benefit of the audience here, I did leave extra copies of both of these documents with Kelly. And so after the meeting, I assume, feel free to approach her and she'll give you copies.
Very good. And again, thank you for the three of you to taking a look at the position description. And I think rather than putting in a position description, I think it's better to have a discussion, put it in the recruitment materials. So thank you very much for that. Just for the record, our retreat is going to be held where, Mr. General Manager?
The Oregon Zoo.
Okay.
And I would just note, perhaps follow up, that we'll have obviously sort of retreat style topics for most of the morning, but then around the noon hour, we would pause and actually open a formal meeting where you would have the opportunity to take testimony and have the conversation you're talking about related to the recruitment materials, and then actually be in a position to adopt that in open session.
Good. All right. Thank you. All right. we're ready to move on, I'll let the staff do the staff reports again from now on. Confuse me less. So let's go on to Resolution 17-10-75, which is authorizing the issuance of capital grant receipt bonds. Mr. General Manager?
Yeah, Mr. Board President, if I could ask Nancy to come up and join us. Nancy Young Oliver is our Director of Financial Services. No, wrong title. Grants and Budget. Again, what we'd like to do is sort of go over the general status of our bonding program here. The first resolution, and you have two in your packet that deal with the bonding questions, really deal with the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program funds or regional flexible funds that are allocated to TriMet. I might note that we had a partial allocation of funds that were available to us earlier this year, and we did come to you with a resolution seeking the opportunity to bond just that portion. We did not move forward because as the conversations developed, there was an augmentation of that revenue flow that was agreed to at the regional level that allows us to do something, frankly, much closer to what we originally anticipated related to the funding program. And again, this is a regional program where TriMet, to a large extent, acts, wrong word, but as a banker for the region, and the region has dedicated a series of funds over a number of years to support the bond repayment for a number of priorities that are agreed upon at the JPAC table and with the Metro Council. So I'll let Nancy describe a little bit more about where we are with this process and the kinds of projects that will be funded.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The purpose of this first issue that we're going to talk about is the grant receipt revenue bonds. The purpose of this particular issue is to provide up to $120 million to pay for the costs of the bond issuance and the funding of several projects as described to you on the screen. You look at the Southwest Corridor, the Division Transit Project, the ODOT Highway Arterial Project, the Active Transportation Safe Routes to Schools, and the Enhanced Transit Project. Now there could be other projects that is included and approved on the capital improvement plan as approved by our capital projects committee. It's important to note that of this $120 million that it's not going to just be one issuance, but it could be more than one going out at time. And our first date that we're looking at for issuance is no later than February 1st. The source of the funding is that this is from the MTIP funds, grants received directly from Metro. And so we know that we've brought the MTIP funds before you before, but the amount is being increased to look at this particular agreement. Through Metro and the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, they have allotted future MTIP grant funds to pay for the debt service on these issuances. Our next steps, of course, we're here before you, the TriMet Board authorization. It also starts the publication of the 60-day notice period. We'll be assembling the financing team and preparing the preliminary offering statement, and then setting the financing schedule for the bond sale itself. That's it. Kind of just sets the stage for us moving forward in relation to the capital grant received revenue bonds.
I would note last Thursday, JPAC unanimously approved the resolution and forwarded that on to the Metro Council, and I believe they've also approved it or are about to. So we'll obviously make sure that those formal approvals in the agreement are in place before any bonding actions take place. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? Seeing none, it was a very straightforward presentation. Thank you very much. And it is good to see the region stepping up and willing to use some of their local funds for these projects. So I think staff's to be congratulated on the hard work they did, heavy lifting to get to this point. All right, with that then, is there a motion to approve Resolution 17-10-75? Second. So moved, and I have a second. And I won't ask for that again. Is there any other questions on this item? Okay, with that, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to approve resolution, approve the motion to approve resolution 17-10-75, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to resolution 17-10-76, which authorizing the issuance of payroll tax revenue bonds.
And Mr. Board President, same general setup, and I would just note, though, that the revenue that backs these bonds is, again, our payroll tax dollars. What we're proposing to you is all within the strategic financial plan guideline of a 6% limitation of essentially what we put into these long-term bond investments. So with that bit of background, I'll let Nancy go through where we are with this issue.
Great. So here we are again, setting the stage for the payroll tax revenue bonds. We're looking at an issuance around March 1st of 2018. And again, part of our coming before you today is to start the 60-day notice period. And looking at the purpose of this issuance, it's to provide up to $168 million over a series of issues to pay for the cost of issuance, plus funding of several projects, such as the bus vehicles and new service and fleet replacements, Powell Garage, and the Red Line to Fairplex project. There may be other projects within our CIP plan that are also added as we get closer to that issuance. The payroll tax revenue will be pledged to pay the debt service on the senior lien tax, and as Neil mentioned, this will be within our 6% limit as required by TriMet's strategic financial plan guidelines. And just as with the other issuance, we're here getting the board's authorization, starting the 60-day notice period. We'll be assembling the financing team, producing the preliminary official statement, and then setting the financing schedule for the bond sale.
All right. Questions of staff?
We don't expect any problems having the bonds.
No, actually, we have.
Interest in TriMet in the bond.
Yeah.
And our rating is what? Pretty high?
Yes, our rating is high, and of course that's reevaluated with each issuance that we give. And our team has been very active in meeting with all of the bond issuance players and looking at what they're projecting into the market, how they anticipate the bond sale to go, making sure that we are experiencing, well, for new money, that's one issue, but if there's any defeasance of old debt, making sure that we are experiencing that 3% value on that. And so the projections are looking really good. We almost feel like, gosh, we wish we could get out there right now today, because we like what we're seeing. And getting that input from several different players in the market who specifically focuses on the municipalities is very helpful and very informative.
I have a question.
Wait, were you done, Director Esmond?
My question is just whether there are projections or kind of conversations around what's going to be happening with interest rates over the next several months to year.
So the interest rates, of course, fluctuate, and we've been listening and paying very close attention to everyone's projections as where they see the interest rates going. And right now they're looking very favorable. As in the last bond issuance, if you'll remember, we actually postponed that for a little while because the interest rates weren't looking so good. And then we went out to market, and it was actually very favorable to TriMet. We sold that bond issuance, I think we were 12 times over, which was, I think it's a record. When you look at that group too, we had three of those offers were for our entire bond issuance in and of itself. So the interest is very high. TriMet has a very good reputation, and entities, they look at us, they watch for us to be in the market. So we're very favorably received. But we are going to pay attention to those interest rates to make sure that we go out at the right time to get the best situation for TriMet.
Thank you.
Nancy, do we have other senior lien payroll tax bonds outstanding now?
Yes, we do, and that is fully described in our audited financial statements.
Right. Okay. Off the top, do you remember order of magnitude of what's outstanding?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but we can certainly get that number for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. One quick question in regards to, we talk about the 6% in regards to our senior lien debt on our payroll tax revenue. You know, and as we issue, as we make these bond issuance, it begins to kind of creep into that 6%. But as we look out over the next, 10, 15 years, we certainly see asset replacements that we're going to need to do, and state of good repair. Some of that's going to be, hopefully federal funds that help fund us, help fund some of those items. But some of that's going to be some of this stuff that we're talking about today. Do we see over that 10 to 15 year time frame, either edging up to that 6% or potentially going beyond it? I mean, because even though we're looking at it in the current period, everything we do now impacts us in the future.
Mm-hmm. So as we look at the 6% debt ceiling that has been placed, currently we feel that that's an appropriate rate. As we go forward and additional tax revenues come in the door, of course, that raises the dollar amount of debt that we can have because we have more money in the door. There's a direct correlation there. That is a number and a percentage that my team specifically looks at almost on a daily basis. It's a target that we pay very close attention to, and our anticipation is that we will be under that 6%, and at this time do not see a need to increase that. Just purely because the revenues are increasing, and as it increases, it actually raises that dollar amount that we can have in debt. So direct correlation there, and something that's, like I said, watched on a daily basis.
And does that take into consideration kind of the ebbs and flows of the economy? I mean, because as the economy decreases, potentially, hopefully it never happens, but sometimes it does, or revenue decreases based on payrolls diminishing, and that takes in some type of consistency or inconsistency of the economy.
So one of the things that my team also does is that we watch the employment numbers very closely. So whenever there is a company that is going through layoffs or closing their doors, of course, the first thing my team is doing is looking at our payroll tax and saying, okay, so what does that mean dollar-wise? We look at that individually and in the aggregate to see, is it going to have any kind of impact on the overall revenues that flow through the door? So that is also another dynamic that we watch very closely and monitor. When Intel went through their layoffs 2-3 years ago, Nike's going through some layoffs, and then you just have some small, companies that go on. And so, you have a little bit here, a little bit there, but in the aggregate, it can add up over time. But you also have to look at the influx and the new jobs that come into the marketplace. And so I would say, in a sense, it's kind of, it's not remained flat, it's still growing. So another dynamic that we're continuing to watch. And as soon as those hit the street, we are doing the calculations and considering the impact on our debt and our ability to repay that. So we're not at the 6% today. We're under that because we do look at and anticipate those fluctuations in employment and just the changes in the economy itself.
Wow. Thank you. That was thorough. Excellent.
If I might.
You sounds like you got a really fun team. I mean,
I have an awesome team.
I can hang out with them on an afternoon, just shoot some projections just for fun.
Do you know how to use a 10 key? Because it is a requirement to be
I'm
on
an
the
accountant
team.
by training.
Okay.
I can hang.
All right.
Thank you.
Dr. Prosser?
One other question. How will the funds flowing to TriMet from HB 2017 play into this mix? It's not really payroll tax.
It's an employee.
It's an employee tax. Will it be treated for these purposes as if it were payroll tax? Or?
So one of the things that you'll be seeing that's going to be reflected in our financial forecast and as well as our fiscal 19 budget is specifically calling out the employee payroll tax. So it's very distinct. We want to make sure, transparency and accountability here with those funds. As far as the actual receipt of those funds, it'll follow a similar process just like the employer payroll tax. Companies will pay their tax to the Department of Revenue. Department of Revenue acts as a trust over those funds, and minus their administrative fee, of course, will deliver those funds to TriMet. So there is a little bit of a timing gap in the sense of when it's effective compared to when we're going to actually physically receive that in our hand.
I might note to that there is a bonding related question related to that, because the way those funds flow, they actually flow through the Oregon Transportation Commission. So as we get to another resolution here, as the plan is developed for those expenditures, they will be approved. That plan will be approved ultimately by the Oregon Transportation Commission. And so those funds would come to us as a grant, not as direct revenue. So the ability, depending upon the length of that plan and, the number of years included, it will not be the same as our payroll tax related to debt resource, unless the OTC and the rules that ODOT will develop will allow that sort of long-term commitment of some funds related to capital expenditure. Mr. Bottomley is working on a statewide advisory committee to sort of make sure those things are talked through and understood as we get to that point. But it is a very, legally, it's a different mechanism. It becomes more of a grant than direct revenue to TriMet.
Well, and what I'm really interested in knowing is if these funds will be counted as revenues for purposes of calculating the 6% bond limitation, or would these come in outside of that process?
To be honest with you, I think we need to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So I think that will be one of the things we'll want to do as we go through the whole implementation plan of for HB 2017 and sort of do that. And I just might also note to Nancy's very thorough responses, there are a large number of capital requirements coming our way, and I think that it will be important in the years and months and years ahead to continue to look at that 6%, the revenue base. While we have outstanding bonds, we also are paying them off. At one point in time this year, I noticed we were down to that ratio was down to 4.8%, so we had a lot of room. But then, so they come and go, if you will. So it's going to be important, I think, to sort of understand that more thoroughly to your question earlier. And as you start thinking about the track replacements, light rail vehicle replacements, some of the other capital improvements that we are requiring, including potentially additional bus maintenance facilities associated with a growing bus system, I think it's going to put pressure on that 6%, and it's going to be worthy of some additional review.
I have one question. You mean off the top of their head and the kind of the range for new vehicles and buses, what you're looking at, so people are going to understand that this is going to be on the street, changes that they'll be seeing?
Yeah, so these will be new. These are new replacement plus expansion buses. So we do generally, I think the number is, it's growing, but it's about 40 buses a year just for basic replacement, and then another 10 to 15 for service expansion. So those are sort of the annual purchases that we continue to see. We will likely be ramping that up in the years ahead associated with the HB 2017 revenue and the service growth associated with that. So again, we're in the midst of doing revising the fleet plans and associated with this, and sort of also there's both the art of the possible and the art of desirable. Other questions that we're looking at, by the way, related to the fleet, diesel versus electric over the long term. We're also beginning to look at whether or not articulated buses begin to make sense in the system. And I think, candidly, the answer is yes. And the question will be timing and pace of that implementation.
Okay. So seeing no other questions or comments, is there then a motion to approve Resolution 17-10-76?
So move.
Have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second? Any further discussion? Okay, then. Call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 17-10-76, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Let's move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 17-10-77, which is we've been talking about, establishing and appointing members to House Bill 2017 Advisory Committee. Mr. General Manager.
Yes, Mr. Board President, members of the board. This is, again, a topic that has come up a number of times in this conversation, which is how do we begin to develop the plan that will be ultimately presented to the Oregon Transportation Commission approval related to the expenditure of the funds that are dedicated to public transit out of the transportation package, or HB 2017.
We are a little bit ahead of the rulemaking process, but given the lead time associated with all the things we need to do to grow service, buying buses, maintenance, mechanics that need to be brought into the journeyman program, and all the logistics associated with that, we thought it was really important to begin to get a jump start, if you will, on that overall plan and process. So with that, we are recommending that you appoint a committee. We have been in touch with ODOT, so we know what they're thinking. And if you look at this, the proposed membership of this committee that's in front of you, it's very parallel to the area committees on transportation that the Oregon Transportation Commission relies on throughout its diligent work. It's a combination of local officials, interest groups, local residents and users of the system, businesses. So it's all interest groups coming together, business, labor, many other elements. So we followed that model, and that was, again, the advice we've gotten from ODOT staff. It's very possible that we'll be in front of you with some modifications or adjustments to this over time. But the goal is to begin this deliberations of this committee in real time so that they begin to see the budget opportunities that are in front of us for fiscal year 19 and use that as sort of building block information necessary to develop the HB 2017 plan for a number of years going forward. With that, I certainly would offer Bernie as an expert to answer any questions you have, but definitely recommend your approval, and we believe it's really timely to get this started.
I'm looking at the board. Okay, all right, good. Come on up, Bernie. Director Esmond.
Hey.
Hi.
Thanks for coming up. Yeah. Is this list capped?
So, President Warner, Board Member Esmond, no, there's no, as the general manager mentioned, the rules haven't been promulgated yet by ODOT. So they haven't given us a maximum number or a minimum number. We tried to, with this group, find that right blend of a committee that's big enough to represent a broad set of interests, a broad set of interest groups, but not so big that it's unwieldy in terms of its ability to meet and deliberate. So we could add additional folks if there's recommendations from the board to do that, and we'd be happy to take those recommendations.
Well, one interest group are the people who build these things, the people who spend a lot of time in capital helping get this bill through. So hopefully, as you look at it again, you'll reflect and appoint somebody from that world. Those people have families too, you know, and this is besides the jobs. I think
Certainly we can do that. Mm-hmm.
Director Prosser.
Bernie, if, when the final rules are promulgated, if they call for a different mix of people,
Mm-hmm.
will the actions that this committee takes in the interim still be valid, or would the new committee have to go back and ratify old decisions?
So there is some risk that we'll get ahead of the ODOT process. Our mitigation for that, if you will, is that we want this committee to work between now and May of next year, which is when ODOT is scheduled to issue its final rule. Because I sit on that committee that's developing the rule, we'll see that development and hopefully be able to make tweaks as we go along as necessary. But ultimately, our goal is to have a final plan and the final ODOT rules come together May, June of next year, and that gives us plenty of time to amend the plan, appoint additional members of the committee if that's necessary, revisit any deliberations or discussions that have happened up to that point, finalize the plan and then submit it to ODOT, to the Oregon Transportation Commission for their consideration in late summer or early fall of next year. Then OTC will approve that, or hopefully will approve it, and that will set us up for the January 1, 2019 first increment of additional funding.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Good question. Other questions by the board on this one? So this is a great group of people who can help us out. I suspect we may want to add others as we learn more, and as ODOT and Transportation Commission finalizes the rules. But what I'm hearing is we're flexible and we'll be ready to respond to those.
Exactly.
Because we're involved in a real-time basis. Yep. All right, good. Well, I'm sorry.
Bernie, what is the organization? What's the organization IRCO?
IRCO is the Immigrant and Refugee Committee. So they work with a lot of the immigrant communities, folks who don't have English as a primary language and so forth. Yep.
Thank you.
And share where their center is located.
And their main office is on the east side. I don't remember the exact cross street, but 122nd or so. And, yeah, and Gleason.
See no other question then. Is the board ready to proffer a motion to approve Resolution 17-10-77?
With somewhere we have to capture what I just said, and Craig said, so it's in.
Well, it'll be in the minutes, right, I assume?
That
Yeah.
there's other groups that
Yes.
will be looked at by the board to be included if they were.
And what we can do is we can talk with you offline about potential folks to fill that role, and then bring back to the board, because it is a board-appointed committee. Any change to the committee has to come back to this body, so we'll bring that back to you. Yep.
All right, with that, is there a?
I'll make a motion, so adopt.
Okay, make a motion. There's the motion to approve the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right then. Call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 17-10-77, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. The next resolution is Resolution 17-10-78, which is authorizing a modification to contract with G4S Security Solutions USA, Inc., for transit security services. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, as you well know, that we had brought to you a contract previously with G4S. It was a result of a competitive process to identify and find supplemental security services for our system. I would also note that over the last year, we've had substantial increase use of the G4S contract. One, we wanted to provide a much stronger presence after the events at the Hollywood Transit Center earlier this year in May. Second, we've also had additional call on both servicing major events as well as the track interruption, the track replacement programs. G4S has been instrumental in helping us make sure that we cover all those staffing issues. So with that additional usage, it's used up the fuel in the tank, so to speak. So we cannot get to the end of the contract without a modification. We are expecting these level of services to continue. We know that the expectation of our public is for a safe and secure system. We know that this is an important building block. It's not the only building block, but it's an important element of that overall security system that we provide for the for our riders. Just to note that related to this contract, it would increase the contract from 5.4 million to about 10.2. Excuse me, I'll get it out yet. 10.6 million, and again, it really just represents the additional usage of these services we've had. We have found G4S to be very responsive. So, for example, in May, when we asked for additional personnel, they polled very far and wide to make sure that they were able to provide those services for us, and we're very thankful for that responsiveness. and have been a good contractor for us. So with that, we'd recommend your approval. I do know Alex Ubadias is here if there's any questions from the safety and security staff.
Questions for staff on this agenda item? You okay?
No.
Okay. Want to ask?
I was quickly, again, looking at the diversity numbers. I'm not very pleased at all with G4S's performance in terms of what it's doing with diversity. I understand that they talk about that, they're self-performing, made a commitment to be between 7 and 10% in contract amount in terms of using certified firms. And to date, it's only used 2% of the contract amount. And now we are getting ready to double them again to go through. With this diversity record for G4S, just something I cannot support. In this day and time and age, it's time out to continue to allow companies to say they will self-perform, and what the intention seems to prove out to us in our communities is that they don't perform at all. They continue to skate by, get the increases, and nothing different changes. So for me, G4S needs to step up to the table, do what it promised it can do, and not just prevail into they're going to self-perform. And in their own self-performance, what makes up their company?
We probably should have included their own employment statistics. I think you'd find them very representative of the community in general. But I don't have those numbers with me. Do you, Alex, have any of the sort of EEO numbers for G4S?
Sure, good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Ubias again. And with regard to your diversity question, that is very, very important to us as an agency, as well as the community, as you said. With regard to the RFP that originally went out for G4S's original contract, they did go out and contact 6 firms. I can provide a list of those firms if you'd like. But 6 firms, and out of the 6, there's actually only 1 firm that did respond to their request. And that is a firm that goes by the name of ACE. And unfortunately, because of the size of their firm being a DBE, they have a limited capacity, and even they were unable to fill a lot of our service requests that we made to G4S. So we are trying. G4S also has a process. It's about a 5-step process to ensure that they're able to bring on a subcontractor, a DBE, if you will. And we continue to stress that. As you know, there's been a lot, as the general manager has touched on, there's been a lot of need to use security services on the system. So
I would appreciate the additional information.
We'll make sure we get it to you.
Okay.
So Dr. Bethrow, are you comfortable moving forward with this today, or do you need that information first? I want to make sure I understand where you are.
And I'm going to stick with Dr. Bethel on this. 2 months.
So let me ask this: can we defer this to our next business meeting and have some more detail on the firm, and maybe have them appear before us and outline what they're going to do to help change these numbers a bit?
My recollection is we are running up to some limits. And your next business meeting is not until, well, you could do it in November, you could add it to that agenda, but November 8th. I suspect we could get to that point, but I don't think we could get to the December meeting.
Okay.
Without affecting the continuation of service.
Well, I think it's should be a relatively easy number to ascertain. It's basically what is the makeup of their, since they self-perform, what's the diversity numbers that they currently have? That's an important number that, we've talked about consistently as a board, as an agency, that we want to make sure that we're attentive to. And so is their current, makeup of their organization 5% diversity? Is it 10% diversity? What's that number? So I think it's a relatively easy number for them to provide. And I think, was it November 8th is our
November
next
8th.
meeting.
Right.
I mean, I would assume that we could grab those numbers by then. I'm a no at this point without that additional information.
Yeah, I think we should get some information, and I guess what we'll do is we'll have some action items on November 8th also. You okay with that, Mr. General Manager?
Yes.
Okay, good. And what I'd say is get the information, if you can, out to us ahead of time. Go ahead.
We'd like to get a motion to move this item to the next, to the November 8th agenda.
Is there a
So
motion?
you could-
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All right, further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to move this hold this item until November 8th meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motions are approved. Thank you. That's a good solution, and we'll look forward to seeing the numbers. Thank you. All right, moving on then, Resolution 17-10-79, which is authorizing contract with Valleyscapes, Inc., JN Maintenance LLC, Tufel Nursery, Inc., Pack Green Nursery, and Landscape LLC for landscape maintenance and on-call services. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, this is a little bit of a complicated procurement, but fundamentally comes down to the fact that we do have the ability to contract landscape services. We also have some landscapers on staff, but given the seasonal nature of landscape work and the need to sort of do lots of work at various seasons of the year, contracting solutions are very practical for us. What this contract did is actually, or the procurement did, is actually divide the region into 4 different zones, as noted in the staff report. We then put out an RFP looking for, or a request for bids related to contractors to provide the services that were delineated for each of those zones. We then also asked each of the contractors to submit to also tell us what their priority would be, what would they prefer to do, because our intention here was really to award different contracts for different zones. So not end up with one contractor system-wide, but to be able to spread the work. And the goal there was, much as we were talking about related to our last procurement, is to offer more opportunities to smaller contractors, particularly disadvantaged business contractors, in allocating that work. So the result of that is the table that you see on the third, attached to the actual staff report, where we are recommending award to 4 different firms for the different zones. So for Zone 1, Pack Green Nursery and Landscape was the lowest of the bidders within that category. Not overall, but related to the ranked order selection. They are a DBE. The value for the contract, first year plus 4 option years, $1.8 million. Zone 2 to Valley Landscapes. That is not a certified firm, but as you can see from some of the statistics that were included in the report, a very diverse workforce associated with that firm. Zone 3 would go to Tufel Nurseries, which is a very established firm in the region, but I'd also note also very diverse employment landscape. And Zone 4 to JN Maintenance LLC, which is becoming certified as a DBE. So I think, again, this is a result, not the lowest price went to for every category, but again, that was intentional on our part, related to trying to spread the benefit and trying to use as much DBE participation in the process and encourage DBE participation in the process as possible. So we do have experts in our staff from our facilities maintenance department here if there are any questions on the procurement. I know it's a little complicated, but definitely recommend your approval.
Questions for the staff on this one? It's a complicated one, actually. Yes.
Since these are 5-year contracts, what language is in the contract for voiding the contract for non-performance?
So we always have that option, and that option is always in the language. And indeed, particularly if during the first year there is non-performance, we would not continue for the optioneers. And so the optioneers are very clear at TriMet's choice.
And have we ever worked with any of these firms before?
I believe we've worked with nearly all of them in one form or another. Valley Landscapes, for example, did do the landscaping on the Orange Line, the south part of the Orange Line. Tufel has been on many of our projects as well. So, yeah, very experienced firms.
What's the pleasure of the board on this one?
So moved.
Have a motion to approve and a second. I assume that's to approve Resolution 17-10-79? Okay, good. So is there any other questions or comments on this agenda item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 17-10-79, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. And finally, but definitely not least, is Resolution 17-10-80, which is amending the general manager levels of contracting authority.
And Mr. Board President, members of the board, I'm going to turn to our general counsel to review this, but just by way of context, what this is really all about was an issue that we have certainly talked about a number of times at this meeting, but also more thoroughly at our Finance and Audit Committee meetings. Was how do we open up the pipeline of work that needs to get done by contract related to maintaining our state of good repair, and frankly, making sure that we get the backlog of projects completed more timely. So, for example, the CMGC exemptions that you approved as part of the consent agenda are part of that overall effort to try to speed the delivery of projects. We believe this is another element of that, and I'll turn to the General Counsel for the specifics.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. General Manager. So yes, we've been looking at a variety of different strategies. One of them to reduce carryover within the agency, and specifically on our capital program side, to maximize our capital utilization rate and be able to execute these contracts more quickly. And this is one of the strategies that we've identified. We have not, as a board, gone back and looked at the delegated authority thresholds in quite a long time. The last time that this board did that was in November of 2009, and that was just on one piece of it, the goods and services threshold. It's actually been 15 years since the board has looked at the personal services, of moving up the personal services threshold level. So what we did was we did a 3-year look back, trying to find what would be the best recommendation to make to this board about increasing the threshold levels. Where would be the sweet spot, if you will, that we could get to? And we looked at a number of different levels, increasing the goods and services threshold, say, to $1 million or even $1.5 million, and looking at how many contracts would be expedited at certain levels of authority. And we landed on the $1 million recommendation for goods and services because that gave us, we thought, the most flexibility. About another 40% of the contracts we could have gotten through the pipeline that Neil referred to faster if we had done that. And then on the personal services contract side, it also gave us about the same oomph, bang for your buck, if you will, by moving that from $150,000 to the proposed $500,000 level. With respect to CMGC contract exemptions, those would continue as is. We're not suggesting any change in that. We also looked at peer agencies. We wanted to see, where did we fall in making these kinds of recommendations. And we found a number of comparable agencies are at the $1 million threshold. For example, Denver, Orange County, Utah is even higher than $1 million. And so we felt that this is where we should land. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, this is really a good idea, I think, to expedite, speed up, give flexibility. That being said, I would like to get a report maybe once a month, just so as a board member, doing my paid due diligence. We know the flow and
I'm happy to. What we could do is, the board gets their monthly delegated authority report every month. We could maybe star for the next few months, those that would have come to the board but
That'd be
for the new threshold levels?
That'd be good.
Okay,
That'd be good.
sure.
Other comments by the board? Again, I want to stress for anybody listening at home, this is an issue that we take seriously in terms of what authority we delegate to the general manager and frankly staff to execute on behalf of the agency. I think these are good and reasonable standards, and obviously after our review as we go on, if we don't like what we see, we can change it back. So it's not like this is set in stone. So I think you've done some good work. I know I've seen some of the more detail. I think most of the other board members have probably seen more of the detail in terms of the number of transactions at various levels. So I think this is a well thought out proposal, and I think we should be moving forward with it. So I will definitely support this one. So with that, is there a motion then to approve this resolution? I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. Thank you. With that, is there any further discussion? If not, then I would like to call the question on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 17-10-80, which is amending the general manager's level of contract authority, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. General Manager, I don't know of anything else to come before the board on our
vote on
business meeting. Do you?
Nope, I think that's it.
Anything else from the board on our business meeting? Well, with that, I'm going to adjourn our business meeting. We do have a briefing agenda. I don't know how we're doing on time. Are we on schedule?
A little bit behind.
A little bit behind as usual. So I'm suspecting that we probably need a 10-minute break. Is that a good one? So we'll come back in 10 minutes then and get into the briefing agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I thought you might have a question there.
Excuse me.
Correct.
And I think meaty presentations, and I'll ask our presenters to try to be as swift as we can, given where we are on the calendar. So Alan Lato's got the start with a couple of important presentations, one on the business plan process and where we are with that, and then the red line project. So take it away, Alan.
So it seems like every time Al appears before us, he's always being admonished to, okay,
hurry
make
up.
it short. Someday we're going to have to let him come and talk.
Well, we'll see how I do on this one. The first presentation I want to present to you, Mr. President and members of the board, is on the TriMet business plan, which you adopted, or we presented to you a number of times, but we kind of finalized in May. And we've been working on that pretty continuously since then. And working on that in this case means rolling it out to the entire range of 2,900 plus employees. And so I want to give you a quick update on that rollout process, how we are doing on a few key measures, and just give you a hint of what we're starting to think about for next year. So the 5-year business plan for this year's for FY 2018 through FY 2022. And as we talked about, still upholding that vision, mission, values, and the strategy map that gives us the sense of what goals support that and how we roll out the goals and the objectives and the key strategic actions to actually make progress on those. And we've been talking a lot about alignment, big agency, lots of things going on, complex growing region, complex growing system. And that alignment, how we work together and how we're all moving in the same direction is really important. And the example I've been sharing with a lot of staff is the kind of fundamental one for us as a transit agency, which is over 300,000 times on an average weekday, somebody steps on a bus or a MAX train. And they're getting on that train because they're going to work, they're going to school, they're going to a medical appointment, they're doing something that's fundamentally important to their lives. And our operators are there to get them there with good customer service, but to get them there on time and to get them there safely. And all the rest of us, in many ways, are lined up behind those operators, trying to figure out how to make that experience better. So these are some of the examples of trainers and field ops and transportation management who are there supporting the operators, and bus and rail maintenance and service workers and purchasing in stores, making sure that the vehicles are ready to go and safe and as clean as we can make them. Planning and scheduling and finance supporting the funding, the decision making, supporting making sure the routes can be as predictable as possible. Information technology, customer information. Every group I've talked to, and I've talked to groups throughout in all divisions, most of the departments probably by now. Everybody sees themselves reflected in key points of the goals of the business plan. And that's really important, I think, for the conversations now and going forward in allowing all of us to better understand how we support that day-to-day goal of giving great customer service to our riders. We've also been focusing on sort of making sure that we are staying true to the ideas of this business plan, which is to be very honest with ourselves about the measures and whether we're meeting our targets, and learn from that. Learn the positives and learn the negatives and adjust as necessary. And so building a learning environment to be open and aware of those. And made a lot of progress, as I said. We've had a whole series of meetings. Staff has been defining their individual personnel objectives in context of the business plan. Departments have been updating their work plans in the context of the business plan, identifying which elements they're working on and how their work supports the overall goals and objectives of the agency. We're tracking measures, and I wanted to share a few of them. One of them, General Manager already pretty much covered, which is we are still slightly down month to month for ridership, despite the fact that we are adding service. There are some bright spots, as mentioned. MAX is up slightly, largely on Orange Line. Bus is down somewhat, and that continues to be midday and weekends. And there are a series of efforts that we are pushing on, including service expansion, including making sure that we are meeting as many needs as we can understand. And you saw that full presentation from Director Bottomley last month on ridership. So we're using that to help inform us in the development of service concepts for the HB 2017 expansion and beyond. On-time performance, I'm happy to say after a dip, it's kind of in the middle of that dip where we really took a new invigorated focus on on-time performance for MAX. And you can see it is not a perfect experience in all cases, but we are on an upward trend and we continue to focus on that and to try and get to be consistently up towards that target. Same with bus, I'm actually happy to say. After the downward trend with the winter weather that was mentioned already, we've seen a good uptick in on-time performance despite the congestion. And we continue to pursue things both in supporting our operators and schedules and other things, but also working with jurisdictions to figure out what we can do. For example, the bus lane leading on the east side leading towards the Morrison Bridge that just opened up. To be able to skip past some of that congestion. In terms of service delivery, there were a couple of measures, one of which we've already delivered some increase on, that is the number of miles of frequent service, and with the extension of the Line 6 that just went in the Delta Park area in September, we have increased that and we'll look to continue to do that over time. The percentage of overloaded trips, which is we're trying to keep that relatively low, below 2% overall, which still is more than 2% during the peak. And we're at about 2.3%. So that's in a real caution area. It's something we need to continue to look at. And I think mentioned already the idea of articulated buses could be one way of addressing that. So as I said, we're in the sort of middle or beyond the middle of rollout. I think the other thing I did not mention is that, as you all know, our operators go through a recertification each year, and the business plan is now incorporated into that recertification as well, so that all of our employees, regardless of what they're doing, are having some interface with the business plan and aware of that. And I've made myself as available as I can to be able to have conversations and respond to questions and anything else that needs to happen. And it is October already, so it's time to start thinking a little bit about brushing that up and doing an update for next year, which will target again to May of 2018, and thinking about what are there new challenges. One of the obvious ones is HB 2017 was passed 2 months after we finalized and printed this plan, so we need to make sure that those efforts are fully incorporated. And look at new technologies coming down the line and other challenges and opportunities as we go forward. So that was my hopefully brief update on the business plan, and we'll obviously be coming back to you over time periodically with updates on the measures and indications of where things are going well and our interpretation of why, and where things are not going in the direction that we want to, and our interpretation of what we should do about that.
The one concern that I had when this was adopted and in the development stage is that it would create a lot of busy work for the staff in terms of reporting out. And I recall indicating that, you know, from my expectation, instead of asking them for reports on a quarterly basis, on a semi-annual or annual basis, because the time it takes to organize all the data takes them away from doing something else. And it's not that good work isn't taking place. And so I'll just make that as a comment. I know how this keeping track of the data, unless you've got tools to do that, is very time consuming.
Yeah, thank you, Director Simmons. And we took that to heart. And in fact, a lot of the measures are actually ones that we are reporting anyway.
Okay.
It is time, though, over the next year or two to be updating those measure reporting processes to make sure that we're not doing busy work, that we're not putting things down on paper or in an electronic file somewhere that nobody looks at.
Right.
And so we're trying to find that happy medium between them. And of course, we have the flexibility. Some of the measures don't make sense to measure more than once a year. Some of them need to be somewhat more frequent, but the ones that we're tracking anyway for more than just the broad scale of the business plan, but actually individual key objectives.
Okay, thank you.
I'm struck in your presentation about how successful you've been in terms of getting the word out and touching all of the employees. I don't know that I expected to have this level of success in terms of reaching the entire organization in the amount of time that you've done it. So I give you kudos for that. I know that's a big effort. So,
thank you, Director Prosser. Just to be clear, the recertification, for example, so many of our employees are operators. The recertification is just starting up. So most of our operators are still in the point where they're waiting for that presentation. I, though, have had, dozens and dozens of meetings, and we've done a little bit of, I work with directors and managers to help them have conversations with their staff beyond that. So it's not just me doing that. It's a whole effort from all across the agency.
what has the response been from line employees? Or are they accepting of this? Are they excited about it? Or do they think, oh, it's okay, it's just more busy work?
Right. I think it runs the full gamut. I will be honest that when I started having these meetings, I expected more of the response of, oh, this is just the flavor of the month. Come back and tell me next year what you're working on, the new thing you're working on then. And I've gotten a little bit of that. I think you'd expect that, but very little, surprisingly little to me, which I'm extremely encouraged by. And I would say, every conversation I've had has in some ways exceeded my expectations of people's interest and hopes for this process. That to give us all a little bit more clarity, to allow us to work more in alignment, and for everybody to get a better sense of how do we know whether we're heading in the right direction. It's a big burden to keep moving forward, but it's been extremely promising to me, those conversations.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Absolutely.
And Alan is not off the hook yet. He's here to give you an update and a review of the red line project that we have in concept form right now, and would begin to move forward under actions that would be proposed in the next budget. But we want to give you an update on where this is right now. So, Alan?
Absolutely, and I've talked about this a little bit with at previous board briefings, so I'll probably skim through a little bit of this and try to hit the highlights. Just you actually heard some comment about the need for growth in the system and the need for capacity in the system, and this project is an outgrowth of an effort that started looking at, things continue to grow, and the core of our system is causing us issues in terms of on-time performance and in terms of capacity. What can we do about that in a relatively near-term effort? And through conversations with FTA, identified this opportunity as potentially doing what we're now calling a red line small starts project, for lack of a better term for the moment. We'll come up with a better one when if we pursue this as a true project. But responding to some of the regional growth needs and trying to get to the point where we address what's illustrated up here briefly, which is a map, and the details don't matter as much, except that red is bad. In terms of reliability and travel time and disruption to the system as a whole. As you heard earlier, that when we have issues on any core part of the system, like the Banfield alignment between Gateway and the Steel Bridge, where 3 of our 4 lines come together and then the last one has to try and meet up, that can disrupt the entire system, not just one line. And Gateway really stands out as a place in this analysis. And then if we look at travel times and delays coming from east to west, which is where the red, the green, and the blue come together, we unfortunately start off even at the airport behind a lot more often than we really feel like we need to. And then it compounds as those lines come together and they start hitting more and more issues. And this slide illustrates what I think I've shown to the group before, but I will briefly describe it, which is this is a snapshot of service coming together at Gateway during the peak period from 5 to 5:30 p.m. And heading westbound. The blue, the green, and the red come together. And each one, while they're traveling on the segments of the lines that are controlled by signal systems to make them safe, you need about a 2-minute window for that train to move through and have enough space from the next train to be able to be fully safe and make sure that there's adequate separation between them, given the system as it's built right now. And so those colored lines on the left show that 2-minute window, color-coded by the line, and then the yellow, the two bigger gaps are where those trains meet the yellow line at the steel bridge. And what you don't see is a lot of white space, which means that given the current system, we have to be pretty precise. There is in some ways a little bit more capacity. You could shift things around and get a little bit more white space, but that demands even greater precision in hitting those slots to be able to have that kind of capacity during the peak. It does not look like this during the off-peak. There are fewer trains, but during the peak, it's an issue. And all of those things come together. When we looked at them, it's the red line that is the biggest issue. And when we've done modeling about how to get up and above 90% on-time performance on MAX consistently, it's the Gateway and the airport single track sections on the red line that need to be part of those to really consistently get there. And so the project is focusing on sort of 3 elements. One is extending to fare complex, which we had some plans to do anyway to balance out demand and loads on the west side. But the opportunity with an extension of a rail line serving new stations and the growth in ridership expected with that is to leverage some additional federal funds to be able to fix some of our on-time performance and reliability issues at Gateway and at the airport. And so that's what you see up there. In addition to some additional vehicles to be able to provide that additional service to the west, and space at the Ruby Junction yard to store and maintain them. So we'd get that more service for the crowded west side. We'd be fixing Gateway, especially, and as well as airport to reduce those impacts on-time performance and recovery from incidents. And the opportunity to leverage federal funds through what's called the Small Starts program. There you can see the extension, 10 additional stations on the west side. The work on the west side needed for that is just to put in, improve the switch beyond the fare complex station and put in a brake facility so that our operators can have a reasonable place to stop and turn the trains around. And then improving the Gateway with a new track so that we are not getting in our own way when we operate through there, and improving the airport with a double track so that we are not getting in our own way. And there you can see the Ruby Junction expansion of additional lines. Where we are right now is sort of, you could call it 5% conceptual design. And a sense of the scope and cost of the project, which would be around $205 million. The benefit, obviously, there is that under Small Starts, we could ask for up to $100 million from the Federal Transit Administration as part of that. So it would be something close to a 50-50 split. For elements of the system that need to be addressed at some point, and it feels like we've done enough work to get a good sense of the kinds of improvements we ought to do there. We're working with the Port of Portland, which obviously owns the airport, the City of Portland, ODOT, and others to work through details, make sure we're aware of issues that might come into a project like this. The good news is that it is mostly within TriMet's existing right-of-way, and other than during construction, there would be relatively very few impacts for a project like this. And planning to do broader public outreach, assuming we move forward, coming this fall and coming into the new year. There's a little bit of it included in our overall public outreach that's going out now around service planning, talking about this. If we decide to pursue this project, the next steps would be in the near future, that is during 2018, looking to do what's called a project development application to the Federal Transit Administration, which is essentially formally kicking off the FTA process. It's not a guarantee that the project is funded, but it is a good sign that it is a positive project. And we would be looking then to kind of firm up the design, working with the stakeholders, get the costs finalized, and work through the Environmental Protection Act or Environmental Policy Act issues, and make sure that we're covering all our bases on that. And then we would need to identify the local funds to match those federal funds and be able to move forward. So as I said, a lot of opportunity here, a lot of need, also not a free project, and so an issue that we're going to need to work through in context of the other demands on our resources. With that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions or comments.
Usually in things like this, there's a go, no-go point. At what stage is there a no-go, no-go point related to this? And if it's a go, realistically, this is for me trying to fine-tune my understanding of how long it takes to realize stuff like this, is when could it feasibly be completed?
Right now, we're looking at a. Let me answer the when could it be completed first, and then I'll back up to the go no go. Right now, we're looking at a kind of staggered delivery or a phased delivery of 2021 and 2022 for various elements of the project. And part of that is the federal process just takes a little while. There's a few cases a few steps where you have to ask permission to move forward. And part of that is construction, especially of a new track at Gateway, is fairly substantial and would take some time. In terms of the go, no go, truly the go, no go is when you sign the grant agreement with the federal government. However, backing up from that, there are several steps that really indicate intentionality. And once you try to enter project development, that's the first true sign to the FTA that, hey, we're serious about this project. And though projects don't always make it forward, it's always better never to enter into project development unless you're pretty committed to making it happen.
Is there a possibility that certain parts of this project would go forward where other parts would not? Because you've got it right now lumped together as a $205 million
right.
project.
I think the best way to answer that is, any project is potentially scalable. The key part of this project is if you're going to do any of the other work, you've got to have the extension, because that's what gives the opportunity to even pursue the federal portion in the first place.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Looking long-term, does this, carrying out this project have any impact on the possibility of having a tunnel under the river?
That's a good question. It doesn't get in the way, because if you look at where the construction actually happens, it's well away from the central city. So if we pursue a tunnel sometime in the future, this does not do any work that would then become obsolete. What it does in some ways is, as I mentioned, add to the reliability of the service and add somewhat to the capacity of the service. If it if it turned out that a tunnel made sense, it might be that the red line could be an additional line running through there. That I'm stretching a little bit for that. Mostly, I think the answer is that there's nothing in this project that would get in the way of or that would be obsoleted with a tunnel.
Okay. My second question relates to your slide number 4. I guess I want to understand you get out to Hillsborough and 80% of the trains are delayed.
Yeah, and
why is there additional? You've just got the blue line? Why are delays kind of increasing at that point?
And this is to a different standard than our on-time performance. This is to a 2-minute late standard. So we could show up at Hillsborough 4 minutes late, and to our on-time performance standard, we're on time. But to a standard of actually hitting those slots at Gateway and again at Steel Bridge, 2 minutes is enough to knock us off. And so part of that is simply that we've applied a higher standard. Part of that is that there is still some sort of friction as you go through downtown and the rest of the system that we'll need to continue to look to. The Gateway is the biggest one, leaving from the airport, and then the Gateway is the biggest one in the entire system that's kind of sticking out like a sore thumb that is related to those delays.
I'm sorry, this is maybe a dumb question. What does extending the red line out further, what does that do for you?
It's mostly about providing new access or new frequency for people who are riding to and from those 10 stations. In addition, there's some benefit, obviously, to having additional stations have a single seat ride to the airport for those who might use it for that.
Alan, isn't it true, though, that we've got some capacity imbalance between the blue line and the red line now?
Yeah. Thank you.
So would also be addressed by extending the red line out further to other stations.
Maybe to just accentuate that, thank you. So the blue line, because it goes all the way, gets overloaded during the peaks, and the red line is actually underloaded. There's capacity on the red line. If we can extend the red line, that will balance out the demand between them because more people will be able to get on the red line instead of having to wait for a blue line to get to the station they're trying to get to. So there will actually be, the idea would be that the greater frequency will add ridership, and the better balance between them will make the blue line riders' experience better.
Good, thank you.
Just a quick question, Alan. You referenced something that was just music to my ears when you said a single seat ride to the airport. I didn't see in the presentation where that's going to happen from Gresham. So I'm just kind of holding out hope that, that someday I'll just be able to take one seat all the way to the airport.
It's a tricky one.
Mostly tongue in cheek.
This is really probably a question for you, Neil. We talk about the steel bridge. How much time, how far out in the future do you anticipate that as an agency we have to consider alternatives to that bottleneck?
Oh dear, hard question. I think it's one that we'd want to put a little study to before I came back to answer. But I would say it's one of your sort of 15 to 20 year kind of notions.
Oh, wow.
I do, which is why we're doing some study right now on it. And, Board Member Prosser was one of the champions of this, to really begin to learn about the issues and the problems, begin to share that with some of our key partners and stakeholders. But that conversation is just beginning to ramp up. And I might note a parallel to that is the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge process that is underway right now with Multnomah County. And it's sort of the same time frame, which is you need a conversation just to start identifying the problem and the potential solutions before you actually move it into a project. And so I think over the next few years, TriMet will be needing to do that.
So we think that the bridge will hold up long enough for that?
Well, it's done it for over 100 years now, as I understand it. So I think the answer is yes, pending the big shake.
Yeah.
But I would tell you also part of our evaluation will be what else could you do to the steel bridge, because there's always a rehabilitation or a stabilization issue, but it's a very hard bridge to ever
Yeah.
retrofit.
And then be like throwing good money to bad or something like that. Having been somebody who's been bottlenecked at Gateway, I applaud that. I mean, I just get stuck on the rail, like, all the time there.
Director Edmund?
Well, since you're looking at the tunnel underneath the river, I know you're not busy. Why don't we just bring all the light rail down underneath the city and have like a train station down there? So you don't have the trains going through downtown, which is only going to get more congested. So before you leave, can you take care of that and fill it out?
I don't think we'll quite get that taken care of, but
Other parts of the country where they have that.
sure. And I would just note that there are trade-offs between, on-surface, more frequent stations and access to the speed of travel through downtown and the capacity issues. So these all are balancing questions that you bring in.
I get it.
Thank you.
I guess I just want to make a couple comments. First off, and a question. First off, in answer to Director Bauman's question, I'm one of those people who does get stuck on trying to go to Hillsborough where I live on the blue line, and I often take the red line where I can get a seat. And then I have to sit out in the cold at Beaverton waiting for a blue line to come by that probably is empty most of its folks. So I understand the crush and the problems we have out there.
You can tell I'm an East Sider.
Yes, right. So thank you. I think it'd be a great addition and help a lot in terms of evening out the load on both of those lines. So it's a good project. Yeah, and it was interesting. Riding in this morning, often talk to folks. Somebody saw I had a board packet, but you didn't talk about TriMet. But what was interesting, when we got to Goose Hollow, there was 3 ladies who worked at the same location. And one of them got out of Goose Hollow to walk downtown because it was faster to walk downtown than it was to go through downtown and stop at all of the stations. So the question is, does any of this, does eliminating a station or 2 or 3 in this actually benefit the service in some way? Because I always go by the Knights Hill Right station and go, why do we have this? And so I'm just curious, if we eliminate some stations, would that help out some of the flow of trains?
Every station is a delay for everybody who's not using that station. And it kind of ranges. It could be between 30 seconds and a minute of savings per station, depending on where you are and how the signal systems work around it. So there is a benefit where you strike that balance between access and travel time. And the travel time is a benefit to everybody on, and then you just have to think about access. The stations downtown are very close. On the Cross Mall, they're a lot closer than they were on the mall when we had that experience with it. So yeah, there is some opportunity there. It just has to be balanced off against how we think about access.
Is anybody else besides me talking about it now?
We hear it from a lot of
Okay.
stakeholders.
I assumed you did.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
I would just to add 30 seconds worth is that extension also, as you know, would serve the employment corridor in Washington County. So it really serves Nike and Intel and a lot of the large businesses there. And they have brought up the issue of the speed through downtown. I would really love to get more of their employees on the system and hear back from their employees that that's one of the impediments. So we've actually even toyed with, do you put some station removal into this project?
Yeah,
I think we've come to the conclusion there's no benefit from the federal process because we can always do that with our, frankly, our own money. And after you hit the $100 million matching threshold, there is no more under this program. So, but it still is a real consideration that we need to, I think about as we progress this project overall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have just a couple more, I think, actually quite expeditious updates for you. One on our low and compare process, and the other is on the citation process. These both are follow-up from the successful legislative session. And I'll actually turn it over to John Gardner.
Yes.
Update on the low and compare.
Good morning, President Warner, members of the board. And I will be incredibly brief. So brief, I only brought one slide and no handouts, but I'll take all the questions you have. So the good news is that we're on schedule in terms of being able to launch a new low-income fare program next summer. And although you've heard earlier that we won't actually have the resources, the GM and you all have committed to that. So we are in a good place to meet our July start date. We're full on in program development right now. We had a chance to take a team up to visit the King County Low Income Fare Program, which much of ours is being modeled after. And we had we met with their program staff, we met with their marketing and outreach team and looked at their collateral and reviewed their process. We met with their finance team and discussed sort of the give and takes that department has had to make in terms of implementing the program. I mean, we met with their contractors and their community-based organizations that are actually signing folks up for the program and got a really good sense of the lessons learned and sort of the promising practices and mistakes that they, if having to do it differently, would have done it going forward. So that's really informed our process. Obviously, we're going to localize that to make it work in our community, but it helps to give us sort of a head start in what we're trying to do locally. At TriMet, we have a project team, and we've met, and we're sort of weighing the pros and cons of different implementation models. We've submitted a job description for the low-income fare project manager to HR, and they've done a great job. They've scored it, and we have a draft ready. Hopefully, we'll post in mid-November. What's next for us is we have to submit a budget request because obviously to develop this program infrastructure this year to be able to beta test a program in late spring, we actually need some resources now. So I think that'll be part of something you all review soon to put us in a position again to meet our July start date. We're in the middle of outreach. This website actually is, this image is just a snapshot of the web page that's been developed. Below this, you'll see more information about the actual program framework. There's some initial questions. There's a space for folks to give us feedback, and we'll collect it through this. But in addition to this, we have a series of sort of community forums planned, the first being next Monday at the Rosewood Initiative, where we're going to be talking to community-based organizations and nonprofits that serve transit-dependent populations and that serve low-income individuals to kind of give them an update around a couple initiatives, not just a low-income fare program, but also to gather feedback across a variety of questions. We have 25 organizations registered for that. We'll be doing a second one at the PCC Willow Creek location in Washington County, and then a third one in Clackamas Community College. Clackamas, again, trying to get service providers who work with these communities to really inform the process. So our final program model takes into consideration sort of their ideas and concerns. We also will be tabling sort of awareness tables as part of the planning outreach. So there are 7 open houses planned over the next, I want to say, few weeks or months related to the service changes, and we'll be there as well, sort of spreading the word and gathering feedback. So we feel really good about where we're at. The next step for us is to work with legal to draft a low-income fare ordinance for your first review in December, and so far so good. There was a question, I think, earlier about low income and the connection to the Lyft services, and we're just beginning that conversation. I think the way to think about it is, TriMet obviously has a long history of subsidizing fares and creating sort of lower income opportunities. So we have a youth fare that's highly subsidized and reduced. We have an honored citizen fare, and now we have, or soon we'll have this low income fare. And in our initial research, we haven't seen overlapping. So if you're a youth and you're getting the half-price youth fare, you're not also getting a youth fare and a low-income fare. You're essentially qualified for one of the categories. And in the King County model, their paratransit service is just like ours, highly subsidized, and there's not an additional benefit for the low-income fare. Those folks are participating in what they would call their honored citizen. So we haven't seen overlapping programs, and so that's what we're looking at, but we're still open to that conversation. But at this point, we see it as adult targeted fare to reduce the cost for the folks at 200% or federal poverty. So that's my update. I'm willing to take and answer any questions you might have about the process so far.
Go ahead.
John.
Doctor. Another doctor.
my age-old question about how does this low-income fare differentiate from the $5 million that we provide to agencies to offer complimentary use of fare?
Mm-hmm. And just, I think if you mentioned 5 million, are you combining access transit and fare relief, where we let agencies buy fares for a reduced cost?
Well, we used to have 3 million, and then we increased it to 5 million, and it was to give passes to agencies to let them decide who got to use it, but multiple people use the same pass.
Well, I'll speak specifically about Access Transit, which is about maybe $1.4 million of free fares.
Okay.
And so the idea there is that's essentially emergency assistance.
Okay.
Right. So we have about 90 nonprofits and community-based organizations. Again, these are the same folks we're going to be pulling in for feedback around the program design for the low-income fare program. But these folks are giving people one ticket at a time, 2 or 3 tickets at a time, and it is for that customer, that client, to get emergency services, as opposed to a low-income fare program, which is sort of relieving the burden of the cost of transportation in an ongoing way, right? So it's really, I would argue that the low-income fare program is targeting working poor, and the Access Transit is emergency assistance. You know, before you get your first check, here's a book of tickets to let you get to and fro work for a week, as opposed to, in order to help you to mitigate some of the rising costs of our society, we're putting an investment to allow for transportation costs to be reduced, so you can use that other income on other services.
So what makes up the difference between the 1.4 and the 5 million?
What I think you're referring to is we have large purchases of transportation, county systems, large nonprofits that buy $500,000, $1 million worth of transit fares, and we have a fare relief program that allows for, I think, a 5 or 10% reduction in the cost of purchasing. So that 5 million is probably the total subsidy of all those different partners buying fares at a reduced cost.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
No, let the good doctor go first.
Go for it.
Prep him for surgery. John, just one question. I want to follow up on something that Chris mentioned earlier during the public comments, was the low-income fare not addressing the whole system of lift fares. Is there anything being discussed to do that? How does the bottom paragraph in your slide apply to those who are taking Lyft, that if you're making up to 24,000, less than up to 24,000, then you can do the 125 or have the honored citizen fare? Is that in any type of way going to have any application for Lyft?
And so that was my sort of last statement about we don't see this as an additional right. So the honored citizen program is a reduced fare. The youth fare is a reduced fare. The low-income fare program will be a reduced fare. You couldn't put them together because we completely understand that we have low-income youth in our community. We have low-income honored citizens and seniors in our community. Each one of those systems has a subsidy set up for its specific customer group, and the low-income fare is sort of the last group of folks that weren't being sort of supported by these other costs. It's 18 to 64-year-old adults who are up to 200% of federal poverty. So we don't see it adding that discount, which really is aligning the cost of transportation for low-income folks with honored citizens and youth, to then add additional discounts to honored citizen and or youth. That wasn't really part of the task force, I think, focus when we sort of researched the feasibility of a low-income fare program, and we've not seen it in looking at other systems. That is what we're doing now, is to start looking at, okay, so in our initial review of the other 9 or 11 low-income fare programs around the country, how has instituting a new low-income fare program affected, if at all, their other programs, their paratransit services specifically? The closest example is King County and their process, and their Lyft paratransit service program is separate, and they don't add an additional benefit, even though they have a larger program than what we are going to be launching. I think at the point of launch, I don't think we're going to be able to sort of answer that question. I don't think it's going to be a target. I do think maybe after the first year we can revisit it, But again, I'm not a decider. We'll be developing recommendations for you all to approve.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, is it my turn now?
It is.
All right.
Thank you for waiting so patiently.
Sure. John, this is wonderful stuff and it's moving right along, but sitting here, I'm going to be confused as the next person, and I just spent a weekend with some of the people who helped write the legislation and pass the legislation. So I'm just thinking out loud that maybe we can get something, update certain people, certain groups, that what's going on, because I don't mind a little egg on the face, but not egg on the face, but just I wasn't comfortable answering all those questions. Besides, hey, it's moving.
Yeah. Well, in addition to our page, Metro's also putting a page to really canonize the task force.
I'm thinking besides a page, another. We'll talk offline.
Okay.
John, thank you for your, what I would say, quiet confidence and calm demeanor on this. It's been needed to move this thing along. It's appreciated, so thank you. Look forward as we get some of the details fleshed out here over the next few months.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Second report will be on the implementation of, do I get it right, Eric? HB 2777.
Yes.
All right. And Eric Van Hagen will give you a quick review of where we are in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Board President, members of the board. Just a very brief update on where we are with implementation of this bill and sort of a setup for a discussion that we expect to have with you all in December to come in sort of for a landing on decisions about what the fine amount should be, what the number of hours of community service should be, informed by the public outreach that I'll discuss in just a moment, so that we can move then towards a January ordinance that would begin to implement this. But just to refresh your recollection, this is the process authorized by House Bill 2777 to provide for an administrative resolution option of a citation during the first 90 days after issuance, and a successful resolution by one of the methods provided in the statute would mean that the citation is never filed with the court, the goal being to keep people out of the court system. There's a lot going on right now, and I'm not going to touch on all of it, just a couple of quick highlights to get ready for this, some technology upgrades and updates to be able to track these citations and move them through the system. We're also using this as an opportunity to transition to the issuance of electronic citations instead of paper out in the field. So this would involve scanning a driver's license on an app on a phone. It would auto-populate all that information into the citation, allows for much faster citations to be issued, no legibility problems. You have a mobile printer that prints the citation, much like I'm sure none of you have ever received a parking ticket in the city of Portland, but they use a similar method and will stick it under your windshield. It's that sort of a style. It will not only be faster in the field to issue those, but it will allow us to provide some additional information to customers on those citation forms. We're also getting new citation forms. The Oregon Judicial Department has agreed and seen the need that we have to make sure that our customers have good information at the time of cite, because that may be the only time we know we're going to contact that person. All the forms we use have to be approved by the Oregon Supreme Court, and the Oregon Judicial Department is underway with developing a mass transit citation form for the first time, which we think will be a help and a benefit to our customers. Finally, on the community service front, everybody has certainly rallied around that as a positive improvement, and we're already doing outreach to community service organizations that we would partner with to allow people to complete their community service through third-party organizations. Right now, though, is really the time of public outreach and listening. We've got a survey out online, and it will be offered to people out on the system to try and get feedback on these questions. We've got a series of forums and open houses. We'll be joining with the Low Income Fair and the Policy and Planning Outreach to add this as an element to their discussion to maximize the number of people we're reaching. And we also have a really fantastic work group that's going to begin its meeting next week. Director Bauman has very kindly volunteered for service on that work group. We have an ACLU, Oregon Justice Resource Center, a number of different organizations and community members who are involved and will be providing us with input and information about some of these key policy decisions. And all of this will lead to, and I should say, there may not be total consensus from all these. I think there will be a different number of data points that we'll have for you based on all these community discussions in December. but hopefully can lead to some recommendations and a consensus on particularly the fine amount and the number of hours of community service that we feel are appropriate for this system, so that we can then memorialize that in an ordinance for first reading in January. That's my quick overview, unless there are any questions.
Quick question. When you say community service, at this point, what would that entail? I mean, it's not finalized, I guess, but
Sure,
just a couple examples.
In fact, later today, I'm going to go out to the Oregon Food Bank and meet with them. They have a wonderful community service program. They have a court-ordered program, and we would I've called it sort of a cousin of your court-ordered program, where it's not quite the court-ordered program, but they have the process to verify people and send us back the verification that somebody's committed or completed their number of hours. They have locations in Washington County and in Portland, and they have somewhere of 30+ shifts a week, so that we can say to people, here's the number of hours you got to do, here are the organizations you can do it with, you fit it into your time schedule, and organizations that have weekend shifts and evening shifts and day shifts and everything, so that people can do it in a way that fits for them has certainly been the model. The Oregon Rebuilding Center is also very excited. A lot of these groups are really interested in being a part of this, and they've been very, very receptive to our outreach.
Well, at the Oregon Food Bank, make sure you don't put an older person in there with the shovel having to break up the frozen peas like they did to me. So.
Okay.
It was a stick. True story. Yeah, 3 by 3 by 3.
Thank you. We really look forward to seeing that.
Yeah. Thanks for your work. I appreciate it. This is important.
Mr. General Manager, do you have other comments?
No, that concludes our briefing. I think you've seen from some all-star staff, which is of course why I said I'll be leaving the agency in great hands. All the people you saw are examples of that. So unless there's any questions of you, that's it.
Thank you very much. And the Finance and Audit Committee is meeting where?
Room B.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you for your time
How about
this morning, everybody. Huh?
How about
Finance and Audit Committee.
the other group?
There's another group meeting on
and that's
Burnside room.
Where is that?
8th floor. The Burnside room is over here too.
Eighth floor. Thank you.
All right, good.
Thank you.
All right. Yes.